Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. Welcome to another episode of TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is March 2nd, Tuesday, March 2nd, and we have a great show lined up for you today. We're riding high on news that the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccination has been approved by the FDA, and so many great things happening in the tech space these days. Lots and lots of great conversations on today's show is going to prove that. Before we get started, though, I do want to quickly remind you guys we do have the Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit coming up this week, March 4th and 5th. You can go over to MediaOpsEvents.com to take a look at the agenda and to register. It's going to be a great one. I highly recommend you spend at least a little bit of your day on March 4th or 5th over at the Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit. Kicking off today's show is a conversation between Alan Schimmel and Ryan Mack, who is the Director of Engineering at a company called Uptycs. They discuss container security and cloud-native security. Uptycs is a company that is highly involved in the cloud-native security space. And so Ryan and Alan discuss what role Uptycs plays and how we can help organizations as they move deeper into their cloud-native journey and need to improve the security thereof. So it's a great conversation, totally worth checking out. All right, after that, Alan has a conversation with John Morrill, who is the CEO of Zero North. They talk about security also, but this one is actually more about security champions within an organization and how they can improve DevSecOps within the organization. The idea of security champions is not new, but it's certainly gaining traction as more organizations understand the importance of cybersecurity in their application development process and really all areas of their organization. So John and Alan talk about how security champions can actually help the organization take a security-first mindset. It's a great conversation, and if your organization is kind of grappling with cybersecurity issues, maybe you want to give this one a listen to. All right, after that, Alan has another conversation. This one is with Will Conway from Pathwire. Pathwire is a company that is basically in the email space. And as we all know, that email basically is the killer app for the internet. It's been around for so long, and so many organizations still very much depend on email to get a lot of their work done. So Will Conway is the CEO of a company called Pathwire that actually offers secure, reliable email for its customers. So Will and Alan talk about the trip that his company has been on in the quest to deliver that secure email for customers. It's an interesting conversation, and we obviously a lot of times don't think about email so much in the in the space that giving it really the its due, if you know what I mean, because we tend to live in the moment, and email isn't so much in the moment these days. So many people rely on Slack and other forms of instant communications, but Will talks about how email is super important in the organization and organizations of any size, and it's really an interesting conversation. I know that I will never take my email for granted again, so that's a great conversation and worth checking out. After that, we have a great big announcement. We work with Boca Code and Tech Hub South Florida to actually offer two scholarships to disadvantaged folk in the area. It's called the Engineer the Change Scholarship from MediaOps, sponsored by MediaOps, and it is through Boca Code. So Alan has a conversation with Joe Russo, who is with Tech Hub South Florida, and Todd Albert, who is with Boca Code, and they announced the scholarship and what it means for the South Florida coding community, what it means for hopefully disadvantaged folks in the area, and it's a great way to introduce the South Florida tech community to a population that traditionally has not been involved in technology. We're really hoping to change that. All right, after that, we have our monthly installment of The Lab by Gitlab. Brendan O'Leary comes on. He's the senior developer evangelist at Gitlab, and he tells us about all the things happening this month over at Gitlab. Good stuff all the way around. After that, we have our CISO. This is another one of our CISO talks. This one is, as always, hosted by Alan Schimmel and Matt Newfield. They're going to be joined by Julie Cullivan, who's the board member at Heartflow, and Prasad Ramakrishnan, who is the CIO and CISO at Freshworks. And our own Mitch Ashley from ASG will also be there. They're going to discuss some of the transformative roles that CISOs are increasingly being propelled into, often taking on some of the responsibilities that are well outside the traditional boundaries of cybersecurity. It's an interesting conversation, and it kind of speaks to the heart of whether the traditional C-level titles are still appropriate and still applicable to a lot of the job roles that and responsibilities that are being thrust to a lot of C roles these days. So interesting conversation, and Mitch, being a CTO right now, is obviously very much in the scrum there. So he's got a lot of interesting things to say about it as well. All right, after CISO talks, we've got our Something Old segment. This is from the recent Predict 2021 virtual conference. We have Eva Velasquez and James Lee from the Identity Resource Theft Center, and James Ruotolo, who is from Grant Thornton LLP. Their talk is titled Cybercriminals Relying on Poor Consumer Behavior to Fuel Identity Crime and Business Attacks. Pretty self-explanatory. The ITRC believes that pandemic-related identity crimes will impact victims well into 2021, and re-victimization rates for identity crimes and compromises are on the rise as well. Yikes. The ITRC's Aftermath survey data shows that there is an increase in identity crime re-victimization this year, occurring before. There was one actually occurring before the pandemic hit, and we can expect to see that continue into 2021. So our three panelists for that discussion have a conversation on the survey findings and some of the analysis around that, and basically what organizations and individuals can do to help protect themselves and stay protected. All right, after that, I have a conversation. I do the news headlines, as I always do, and then I have a conversation with Luke Tenery, who's a partner over at StoneTurn. And StoneTurn is a consulting firm. I think it's in the DC area. And we talk about some of the things that we might be able to expect in terms of cybersecurity and compliance in the wake of the new Biden administration and some of the changes that the new folks who are coming in as part of the administration and the Attorney General and the DOJ. There's going to be some changes in compliance and cybersecurity rules and regulations. And so we kind of parse out some of the things that we can possibly expect, and some of the things that, based on some of the hints that we've gotten so far, maybe what we can expect as the year progresses. Good stuff that I have. It's a really great conversation with Luke. After that, I talk with Ringkal Brambot, who is with Team Tata Consultancy Services. She and I talk about low code. She is head of the low code practice in the high-tech digital transformation section or team over at Tata Consultancy Services. She and I discuss low code and its impact on the future of SaaS and how developer team roles will change as a result of low code. It's a conversation that I've had with a couple different people. Everybody's got a slightly different perspective, so Ringkal offers her perspective, but at the end of the day, I think there is a unanimous agreement that developers, as we know it, their roles are definitely going to be changing as a result of low code, and in many, many ways for the better. So don't be afraid of low code. I guess that's the takeaway from that one. After that, I have our webinars preview, as I always do, and then Mitch Ashley comes on for his Analyst Corner segment. The retail landscape is disappearing faster than most of us can experience. Most of us can remember it, Remember, before the internet, the mall was the place to be, as Taylor Swift often sings in her Coney Island song. But it's just not that way anymore. And even pre-pandemic, we saw a massive shift to online retail. Now, in the midst of the pandemic, pretty much everything is being done online. And so retailers have to either maybe make the adjustment to go digital all the time, or create a hybrid environment that embraces digital in a very big way. So he offers up his perspective, if you will, on the retail industry and digital experiences post-pandemic. And he points to a recent CNBC article that talks about digital and in the retail space. And he also has a conversation, also references a conversation, I should say, with Quentin Wall, who's the CEO of Twilio. They have a great conversation about the future of retail in light of the new digital economy. So both of those are worth checking out as reference points to Mitch's Analyst Corner piece today. And he also wants us to remind you once again that the Cybersecurity Virtual Summit is happening this week. Mitch Ashley has a presentation during the Cybersecurity Summit that he's going to be talking about a lot of things in the cybersecurity space, including transaction security, online transaction security, and more specifically. So definitely check that out also. All right, after that, that's it. That's today's episode in a nutshell, and it's a great one. And we're going to get things kicked off right after these commercial messages.
The security landscape is evolving rapidly in the face of disruption. Growing cyber threats, a global pandemic, and other factors have irrevocably changed the way organizations view and adopt security technologies. Cybersecurity 2021, the new normal, will bring together thought leaders, security experts, and IT professionals in the new security landscape and what's ahead in the years to come. On topics ranging from ransomware to DevSecOps, from speakers including Chen-Zi Wang of Rain Capital, Richard Steenan of IT Harvest, and Ira Winkler of Secure Mentum. Visit MediaOps.com/cybersecurity2021 to register.
All right, everybody, welcome back. First up, we have a conversation between Alan and Ryan Mack, who's Director of Engineering at Uptycs. They talk about container security and cloud-native security and what Uptycs does to help organizations, so let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here in another segment of TechStrong TV. We actually have a company we haven't covered before here for this segment, and I'm happy to tell you about them. Let me introduce you to Ryan Mack of Uptycs. Hey Ryan, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show today.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Ryan. So, why, as I mentioned, I don't think we've covered anything from your company before. So I think the good place to start is, what's Uptycs about, and then also what's your role there?
Sure. So Uptycs is a security analytics platform company. We help companies of pretty much any size collect data from their computers, their laptops, their servers, their container environments, AWS, wherever it is, and put it all together in a SaaS platform where they can do analysis, investigations, automatic detection. So it's a very comprehensive security product, and we can talk about any of those areas. I'm a director of engineering. I've really been with the company for about a year, focusing pretty exclusively on improving our coverage for containerized environments. As you know, companies are moving towards containers for more and more of their deployments, and we want to make sure that there's just first-class security solutions that work really well in those environments too.
Excellent. So, Ryan, you're right. Containers are certainly all the rage, and it's funny. We have a site, Container Journal. And just to show you that sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart, when I first went to launch that site, I guess it was maybe 3 years ago, I was really going to look for something with the word Docker in it.
Okay.
Right? Because Dockers were containers for the most part, right? Everybody was using Docker. But I couldn't find anything I liked, and I picked container. It's Container Journal. In retrospect, I should have picked something around Kubernetes or Cloud Native, because I think what's happened is though containers are sort of the atom, the building block upon which our Kubernetes and cloud native molecules are made of, right? We tend to think of the container is just a generic piece of this new stack that we are building on, right? 75% of new applications on Amazon Web are Kubernetes based, for instance, right? So they're container based. And so where 2 years ago we spoke a lot about, quote unquote container security, I think what we talk about now, it's still container security, but it's kind of cloud native security. It's all the stuff. It's not just at that container, but it's managing the security for all of your containers. It's orchestrating that. It's the service mesh that's sitting on top of this. It's an entire stack built on top of these containers. So when we talk about container security, are you talking about just actually securing the individual containers, or this whole stack upon which we've built on top of the containers?
Yeah, it's absolutely about the whole stack. And so this is what I think is a compelling case for our product Uptycs, is it starts from everything from individual employee laptops, the actual Linux servers, to your entire AWS account, to your containers running on a host, to Kubernetes. And each of those pieces feeds data through an OS query-based end agent into our SaaS solution. And so at our SaaS, we're able to provide auditing, visibility, compliance, and security for each of those layers of your stack. It means you have one very common piece of technology, one pane of glass, one interface where you can do your analysis, one tool chain for writing alerts and notifications to tell you when there's problems or potential threats in your system. And all of that entire full stack visibility is easily customizable for your application deployment.
Excellent. Now, does this mean that there's some sort of agent that goes on every single one of these endpoints, container instances, what have you, across your entire infrastructure?
Yeah, so OS Query is an open source piece of technology which we've used as the foundation for our endpoint security. OS Query is a very lightweight agent that basically exposes everything going on in your system through a SQL-like interface. So we've taken the OS Query and we've open sourced customized versions of that don't just talk to your system, but can also interact with Kubernetes or interact with your AWS account in order to also present information about your orchestrator or about your entire deployment, your entire AWS deployment, into that same data pipeline. That data pipeline, which exists on our servers today, ingests that data. It allows you to write event rules to detect anomalies immediately, push those notifications to you via email, Slack, however you want to receive those. But it also collects that telemetry over time. And that allows you to do analytics using, Presto, for example. It also allows you to go back and do point-in-time recovery. So if you find out that, something was maybe misconfigured a week ago, you can go back and look at the entire history of your entire stack at that point in time to really understand the context of what was happening there.
Excellent. So, Ryan, one of the things we've seen with solutions like this is that, it's funny, we were talking off camera that just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? When we were talking about backgrounds and video backgrounds.
Yeah.
Just because we can collect all of this telemetry and all of this data, sometimes the cost of it is prohibitive. And so, it's almost like senior citizens deciding whether or not they can afford to take their medicine, right? Yeah, I'd love to collect everything about everything, but it gets really expensive. So I have to make choices and prioritize what I want to collect and save and what, I don't. I just can't afford to analyze and store that. I'm wondering if that's not a problem here.
We've built a really comprehensive platform that can collect tons of data from tons of different sources. The power of how exactly you want to configure that for your application is really in the customer's hands. We can provide, we have a threat intelligence team that can follow along with the MITRE ATT&CK framework to help you automatically detect certain kinds of vulnerabilities. We can make recommendations around what data is going to be the most important for you to collect to enable that detection. But it's really up to you as one of our customers to figure out, how much do you want in terms of auditing? How much do you want for, how far back in the past do you want to be able to look? And that's purely customizable. We can also, we operate as a SaaS, but we can also be an on-prem deployment. So if you're a customer that does want to maintain a very large historic amount of data, you can be responsible for the storage footprint of that for yourself as well.
Excellent. So what's the average customer do?
Yeah, a number of our customers are the well-known fintech unicorns. We also work with a lot of different industries, Flexport, for example, other security companies like Lookout. We've built this platform that you can really build customized security solutions on top of.
Very cool. Now, again, returning to the container thing, certainly, where endpoint security is I'm going to call it well settled, whatever that means, right? Container security, still a little bit wild west. We saw, I think Red Hat announced yesterday they closed on the StackRox acquisition, which, really started out as container security, moved to cloud native security as kind of a tagline. But so maybe we are seeing, more maturity coming to market. But where do you think the frontiers are in terms of container security?
Yeah, I think the evolution of containers has really been kind of fun to watch. I mean, there's a long history of, how do you deploy services on the internet securely? And containers is an evolution in that. But we've moved from just a container running on a host to a container on a virtual machine. Now we've got serverless computing. And I think that's really where things are getting more challenging and more interesting. Personally, I've been working on how we can deploy OS Query for a Fargate environment. Fargate is Amazon's serverless deployment technology where you kind of specify what do your containers need, and AWS will figure out how big of a virtual machine it needs. It'll deploy it. You never deal with a host. I mean, there's obviously a server, but you don't have to think about it. And so I think each of these systems that are providing more security in some ways creates new constraints and new interesting challenges around how you can instrument those as well. So I think that's where we're going to continue to see. I think at the extreme end, you have things like Amazon Lambda, where you're not necessarily even writing services. You're really just writing a piece of code that magically gets run for you in the cloud. That's sort of the extreme end of this abstraction of, thinking about your own deployment.
You know what they say, today's extreme is tomorrow's normal.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's where we're headed? Do you think serverless becomes more dominant in that regard?
I think serverless opens up a lot of opportunities because if you're not constantly thinking about how do I want to allocate my resources and how do I distribute it, it gives you better flexibility for rapidly scaling your infrastructure. I think this is true for startups. I think this is true for big companies that know that they have cyclical load. So I think that is definitely a direction to go. It does mean that we have to think about how do we build our security solutions, not only to operate there, but to make it easy to think about. A lot of the endpoint security software you might be familiar with, but what if your endpoint has a lifetime of like 10 minutes? What if every time you upgrade your software, you're actually building out new VMs? So making sure that your security solution can really help you understand, the lifetime of your service, even if it's much longer than the lifetime of an individual server. And that's a lot of the work that we've been doing at Uptycs to give you that useful insight over time, despite that evolving infrastructure.
Excellent. I do think that is a, if you look over it's not 100 years, but if you look over the cloud story, right? Originally it was, hey man, I'm not going to worry about my infrastructure. And I'm not going to worry about the server anymore. I'm going to put it in the cloud, and I sit on top of a hypervisor, and I just worry about the OS up, right? And then, we went from there to like the Heroku, early PaaS model where I'm not going to worry about the OS or anything below that. I'm just going to worry about my application and above, right? Because all of that. And now, and really containers and that kind of helped us recognize some of the promise of that early PaaS, Heroku kind of stuff. And now serverless and stuff is, I'm not going to worry about anything, right? I'm just going to worry about, I don't worry about my resources. I just got to worry about my application running, not where it runs, how it runs, or, any of that stuff. And so, another abstraction layer above. But what I think is important is when it comes to security, right? Just because we, quote unquote, don't worry about it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be secured. And where part of that don't worry is, someone else is doing that security. Maybe it's Amazon or the other cloud provider or whoever it is, right? But that doesn't mean there's not security, from wherever the stack going down that we don't worry about anymore. Someone's still got to secure that. And then I still have to have partners who help me secure what I do worry about.
Absolutely. Right? You've moved some of the operational challenges away from the customer, but you've also created a huge complex configuration management problem. So just because Amazon is actually handling all your virtualized environments, you now have to handle Amazon. And so that's where in our product, we have a number of compliance profiles. We can actually rule check your Amazon deployment, your Kubernetes deployment, as well as your individual hosts, just to look for kind of all those well-known gotchas when you're dealing with the complex configuration here. So yes, you've eliminated a lot of complexity, but you've also kind of moved parts of that into another domain, which just requires different tools and different expertise.
Yeah. I agree. So what's coming down the pike from you guys? Where do you see you going next? And, what's the new battlefront for you?
Sure. Well, we just, I think a few weeks ago, sourced our version of OS Query that's really tailored for collecting that Amazon and Kubernetes data. We announced that at OS Query at scale, and it's up on GitHub now. We're going to continue to push into making sure you have comprehensive data from all different parts of your application deployment. We're going to continue in our threat research to make sure that we're building detection rules, we're building vulnerability scanning, all of these things that work both for containerized environments as well as employee laptops, as well as your legacy Linux virtual machines. And as we continue to evolve container security, both whether it's Fargate or Google's gVisor, continuing to make sure that you still have as much visibility as possible and really succinct notifications when there's potential configuration or security problems with your system.
Excellent stuff. You know what we didn't do, Ryan? We didn't even tell people the website to get more information.
Yeah, it's uptycs.com. uptycs.com.
uptycs.com. uptycs.com. Very cool. Hey, Ryan, we're about out of time. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing a little bit with us. Not a problem. Maybe come back again and visit us. We'll dive in deeper.
It was great talking with you. Thank you.
All righty. Ryan Mack, uptycs.com, or uptycs at uptycs.com. That's uptycs.com. Here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, next up, we have conversation between Alan and John Worrell, who's the CEO of Zero North. They talk about security champions and their role in DevSecOps and how organizations can benefit from security champions. Great conversation. Let's give this one a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another segment here of TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment coming to you from snowy Boston. Well, you never know with Zoom backgrounds, but it looks like snowy Boston. My friend John Worrell. It is, okay.
It's snowy Boston. Hi, Alan. How are you?
Good. John, of course, is CEO of Zero North. leading company in cyber, DevSecOps, and here to join us today about some recent research they've done and a report and just talk security in general. Anyway, John, I'm great. It's great to have you here. You know, I'm not gonna lie to you. As a Florida resident down here, we kind of get off on watching people up north with these snowy backgrounds saying, "So how's the weather?" But I'm not gonna do that.
I did it just for you, Alan. I gave you a setup. You can take it if you want.
I appreciate. Yeah, you gave me the meatball there. But anyway, you know, I do look forward to the day, John, where we can do these things in person again, and we can. You know, not worry about the weather. You're more than welcome to come down here. Anyway, though, John, most of our audience, I think, is familiar with Zero North. But just in case, let's get that out of the way first. People who are not familiar with Zero North, what can we tell them real quick?
Sure. We provide a DevSecOps platform that really unites the security teams with the DevOps teams. And our belief is that both organizations are required to make this thing really work. There has to be a platform underneath it that's going to align with their business objectives, get the data they need, and make both operations more efficient.
Excellent. And of course, you're CEO of it. For people who want more information, zeronorth.com?
.io.
Zeronorth.io. I thought it was IO. Zeronorth.io. Okay. Got that out of the way. Let's dive into some of this study, research, surveys you've done, and tell us about it.
Sure. So we did a survey with Ponemon back in, I guess, October. And the results of it, in some were surprising, some were enlightening. So security champion programs, having someone from the security team embedded, if you will, with the DevOps team to help them do a better job of shipping quality software on time is a really popular idea. It's been gaining a lot of steam. I think according to the survey, 60% of the programs out there are 2 years or younger. 40% of those are actually 1 year or younger. So it is kind of gaining steam and getting some momentum around it. Some of the interesting findings were, you know, what do you expect these teams to do, and how does that work, right? So, you know, the big thing is making sure that security is thought of as a design in. Second thing is helping developers better understand what it really takes to architect and build secure products. And a big part of this is helping to make sure governance standards are really upheld across the organization, giving some kind of consistency across what is often many multiple product lines, so there's a consistent global view of risk.
Sure. Of course, John, you know, this is a subject near and dear to us here at MediaOpsDevOps.com, Security Boulevard. The real issue is, you take a large enterprise, X amount of development teams, DevOps teams, whatever you want to call them. There's just not enough security champions to go around, or at least security people to go around. And so the issue then becomes, can I make security champions out of quote unquote non-security people, right? Because otherwise I can't, we can't have a security person embedded on every DevOps team.
It's a hard thing to do. And I'll go you one better. The security person actually has to understand software development and DevOps. So your pool of talent actually gets even smaller and smaller, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a reason we think there needs to be leverage in a platform like Zero North. To be honest with you, that you if you're a general contractor and you're going out on a new job, you can't just send your guys out there without some architectural drawings and without the right tools, right? Otherwise, they're going to be there and saying, okay, what am I really going to do? You're not going to be able to be very effective at all. And oftentimes, in our talking with CISOs, they're puzzled why their security champion programs aren't moving. And oftentimes they're kind of chasing the development teams saying, wait for me. And that really doesn't work. They're not really bringing value to the table. I think the first thing that is required, and this came out in the research as well, is that there has to be kind of a top-down agreement on what the responsibilities are in the secure process or secure application development process between security teams and DevOps teams. And we're finding that most organizations believe in a federated governance model or a shared governance model, where the developers have to build the software. That's their job. They have to build security into the software. They have to remediate bugs in the software or vulnerabilities. But the security team is there for a couple of reasons. Number one is there's a need for enterprise standards. As you said, so many organizations have hundreds or even thousands of DevOps teams out there, and they can't leave enterprise governance and risk management up to each individual team, because you're going to have a total mess on your hands. You have to have some kind of consistent standards. The second thing, though, is that you have to kind of figure out how to build expertise into that process. And expertise has to be founded on something. And our customers really are looking for a single source of truth. What is my current posture when it comes to vulnerabilities? What can security and the DevOps teams look at the same time and agree that, yes, this is a high classification or critical vulnerability, and it's in high priority business application, so this goes to the top of the list, right? This one might be a critical vulnerability, but it's in a sandbox no one can ever get access to. Let's not worry about that right now. But having this single source of data can really empower that champion to, number one, bring real value to the table, right? Because we're prioritizing, we're not saying you have to fix everything. Making sure that the right ones get fixed first, which is huge business value to the product line owner who wants to make sure his software is secure and trusted by his end users, and certainly for the enterprise on their governance risk management program.
Sure, absolutely. So for me anyway, and what it's worth, I think one of the big challenges that I saw when we first started DevOps.com, and remember, I got into DevOps because of security, right? I thought it was going to be a great thing for security. So I think one of the challenges I first came across was the belief in many security circles that developers really don't care about security, or developers just care about getting code done on time. Getting code committed on time. And it's not true. It's not true. But there are a lot of security people who believe that. On the other hand, a lot of developers believed that the security people were just like the people who say no, right? That they're the roadblockers. They're the roadblocks that we need to move out of the way, that they're always, crapping on everything we want to do here. And this is why I think the role of a security champion is so important and has become so important, because we need someone who has a foot in both of these camps, who can talk the talk, walk the walk on both sides, who understands, both sides. And those people are hard to find, though, is really the issue.
There's a lot of truth to that, Alan. First of all, you are totally right that there's many of our customers in confidence have said, hey, there's a war going on between security and the business units, because they're always fighting about, you guys come in at the last minute, you tell me I can't ship this. I've got objectives to meet. I've got my bonus tied to this. What the heck are you doing telling me I can't ship this? And then the flip side is the security guy saying, you know what? You're just putting more vulnerabilities out in the swamp here. You're not helping us at all. The reality is that federated governance model really brings that together, and it can really bring organizations together that says, okay, we can agree that we have to have some kind of governance standards here, right? We have to have a quality control metric on software security, and it's just like any other quality metric you would have in software. But the security team also has to realize and bring value to the table so that security is not slowing down. In fact, they're actually accelerating the pipeline, accelerating the prioritization and resolution of vulnerabilities, and they're making it really developer friendly. To your point that developers don't care about security, not true. Developers actually have to know how to write secure code and be good at it. And the champion can be a big advocate for that in terms of teaching them. But the developers should not have to be experts on the security vulnerability tools. Right? They should be experts on coding. That's what they do. It's what they do best. One of the interesting use cases that one of our customers has in place is really empowering their security champion with data coming out that is specific to each dev team. So they've got data that says, dev team X is really struggling with cross-site scripting. So let me do a quick lunch and learn with 10 people in that team who seem to be struggling with that. And let me give them very targeted training and education on, hey, you seem to be making these 3 mistakes over and over again. Let's just work on those so you guys know how not to do that again. Think about how valuable that is to the business and how much leverage the security champion gets out of something like that, because they're providing real value to the dev team because they're helping them do their job better, cheaper, and faster. And really good value for the business because they're solving a critical, proactively solving a critical security challenge here. I think it's an awesome use case that this customer shared with us.
Absolutely. John, let me ask you a $64 million question.
I like those.
who's your customer within that organization? Is it the security champion? Is it the security team in general? Or is it the developers on the DevOps team, or even the DevOps team folks?
So I'm going to answer that as a two-stage. So first and foremost, our customer is somebody who cares about security and has responsibility for security. They may sit in a corporate function, they may sit in a business line, they may sit in a DevOps team. But they have to understand security and have responsibility for that governance aspect of making sure that the standards are being met. The second tier of that, though, is in many organizations, the DevOps team are very actively involved in evaluating a solution like ours because it does integrate with their pipeline. And we have to make our case that it's easier for them. It's more stable. It simplifies their pipeline integrations, makes the integrations less brittle, right? But we have to make our case to them as part of the process. So a very important constituent. But if we're not talking to someone who owns security, the organization hasn't really committed to security yet, because someone's going to have that job if they have.
Agreed. Another thing I wanted to mention about security champions is a lot of organizations are very hierarchical, right? And so if you're here, you can't talk to me here, but if you're here, you can talk to me here, right? And so where in the organization hierarchy that security champion lives becomes a thing, right? Does the security champion have the gravitas to influence? Because as we were talking off camera, a lot of times it's not straight line authority. It's very much a dotted line kind of influencer, right? The security champion can be almost more of an influencer than a supervisor or something like that. So what's the right kind of place for that security champion? Is he the CISO? Is he below the CISO? Is he just another member of the security admin who kind of is maybe a peer? You know, where do these champions sit?
I think the most effective ones are actually peers to the DevOps team leaders. Those are the ones that can establish really good working relationships, that can build the trust and confidence because they can demonstrate they understand development. They can demonstrate value add where rubber meets the road, where those decisions are actually getting made with product owners, for example. And I think a peer at that level is most important. That being said, it has to be really clear, again, on the ownership of who owns the governance responsibilities, who owns the dev responsibilities. And those have to be supported from high up so that everybody on the ground floor, so to speak, knows exactly who needs to do what. But if you get the right person with the right skill set and that ability to work in that team environment, really great things can happen.
Sure. You know, John, I'll tell you, I posted something on my own Facebook this morning. An article I was reading in the New York Times. Winners and loser jobs coming up as a result of COVID over the next 2 years or so. And what I found was really, really, the top 10 job growth areas. Well, if you were a doctor or healthcare professional working in contagious diseases, and I'm losing the name that I thought of. That's the leading one, right?
Yeah.
Immunologist, 24.9% or something like that growth, and there was 2 or 3 other biotech things in the top 10. So maybe there were 3. The other 7 were all tech, and here's what they were. They were web developers, interface designers. So the interface. Application developers, security, right? Those 3 were 3 of the top 5, basically. And I think it talks to the fact that we don't have enough security folks, let alone security champions. We don't have enough people with the DevOps kind of skills that we need. By the way, also in that top 5 were network and cloud engineers, right? Okay. So, I mean, all the things we're talking, and I think that's a big part of the issue that we're seeing, John, is it's not just that we don't have enough champions, we just don't have enough people to do these roles across the board. right?
Across the board.
Demand is so far outstripping what supply here, right? And so
when you
that's
think
why,
about it, though, Alan, we live in this world that's driven by software, right? Every single company is now differentiating themselves on software, coming out with new software-driven business lines. And I can't get out of bed out of the morning without having my world impacted by software because it kept my home heated, or whatever the analogy you want to use, right? But my entire life is driven by software, and someone has to write that, and someone has to secure that. And just like airline safety, software security is not an option. If you're going to build your entire economy, your entire social existence on software, people have to trust it. And I think that's driving both the demand for developers, but also the demand for application security expertise and tools like ours that will really drive and make that whole process more efficient.
I think that's a key piece of this, John, is that people who, if we're going to have a hard time getting the people to do this, we need to come up with solutions that can force multiply the people we have, right? Because that's what we're going to need to do to make that happen. By the way, airline attendants, one of the bottom 10, right? almost all of the jobs in the bottom 10 were travel and leisure related. But airline safety important.
That might be short term. Yeah. And
it's over the next 2 to 3 years. Yep.
Yeah, people are a little worried about how much travel there's going to be, right? How much airline travel.
Yep.
But back to your force multiplier, so many people come to us because they said, listen, for me to scale AppSec the old way across my organization as a non-starter, I need 10 people, I've got 2. Right. Yeah. So they're looking for that automation to make that happen. And same thing on the development side. If I could, the Deming principles of quality from the automobile industry play out really well here. If a developer can find and fix a vulnerability while he's got his hands in the code, as opposed to when it's moved down the process and it's in QA or it's actually out in production, it's a 1x cost if his hands are still in the code. It's 15x if it's in QA, and it's like 100x more expensive to fix that thing after it's already been shipped out to the customer. So when you think about velocity of pipeline, that automation we can provide for security actually can, increase developer productivity 15 or 20%. So when you think about force multipliers, it can be on the security team, but it's actually also on the productivity of your developers.
Fair enough. Hey, John, we're running out of time. People who want to get information on the study you guys did with Podium here, where can they go?
zeronorth.io, go to our resource page, and it's there. You can download it at your will. Nice to see you, Alan.
It's nice to see you. Hey, John, stay warm.
Yeah.
I
will.
Yeah, we'll talk soon, but hopefully we'll see you soon enough as well, my friend. Good luck with Zero North. Keep up the great work. John Worrell, Zero North, here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a commercial break, and we'll be back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, welcome back. We now have a conversation between Alan and Will Conway from Pathwire, which is a secure email service provider. And Will talks, who's the CEO of the company, he talks about the long, strange trip that his company has been on delivering secure, reliable email for customers. So let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another TechStrong TV interview here. My interview for this segment is Will Conway, who's the CEO at Pathwire. Hey Will, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey, Alan. So happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Will, as we were talking, we haven't covered Pathwire before. Your first time on. We should really, I guess, start with that. Let's start with a little background on Pathwire, maybe a little bit about your background. People
that sounds great.
Know who's here. All right,
Absolutely.
Rock and roll.
It's a bit of a non-traditional story, Alan. Most of the time you hear founders get together, have a crazy idea, get into a garage, build an app, get funded, and then try to take it to, a big exit. But, Pathwire has gone through multiple evolutions with a lot of continuity in the employees, but a lot of different journeys. So just to kind of intersect Pathwire, which was formerly Mailgun, and my background, you kind of have to go back to 2007, 2008, where you had the financial crisis. Me and my CTO, Josh, were actually at Rackspace, and we were out there building clouds. Okay. Back in the days when we didn't know the cloud was actually going to be a thing, Rackspace called it MOSA. So it didn't. I
remember that.
Yeah, so it didn't jeopardize the brand. So, Josh was support tech and then became Dev One. He hired me or got me into the online sales third shift, if I'm not mistaken. So, we go all the way back, and right around the time that the cloud is really picking up steam, and Rackspace is really investing in it. These two guys, Taylor and Ev, were out at Bear Stearns, and that didn't go super well. So, as any good entrepreneurs, they started a company, and in the path of building an application, they found that sending email was a pain. Email is it's the origin of the internet. It's absolutely a huge part of our lives.
Still the original killer app, man.
Exactly right. And it carries the weight of the law. It's ungated. Nobody owns it. It's an asynchronous form of communication that carries the weight of commerce and law, as we found. So, but it wasn't really designed to be sent at scale when it's got all these reputational components. On one end, you have an antiquated system. On the other end, you need to make sure that postmasters know who you are and will let your traffic through. So they built a business just around that called Mailgun that was, sending for developers by developers, API only, or SMTP. And, that was at a fantastic tailwind of, everybody moving over to cloud. You had to block port 25. So you didn't burn these IP addresses that were static and, carry reputation. So, a lot of people are moving their applications to the cloud, but they can't move their email. So they start using these, API-centric component stacks. And Rackspace was out there competing with AWS. It's obviously it didn't go that well in the end, but at the time we were going neck and neck, and we wanted to go out and acquire 4 or 5 different businesses that would give us that serverless leg up, and Mailgun was one of them. So the founders, they started the business, they get into Y Combinator, and within a 1 year in 2012, they sold the company, and then came in as kind of entrepreneurs and in-house. And literally, maybe not a year past that, Rackspace changed strategies. Said we're going to go back to services and support. We're not going to go as much into the building of the cloud as much as we're going to be orchestrating the cloud. And these, 4 or 5 acquisitions kind of lost their home a little bit, or lost their vision and the funding. So, the founders did what founders do. They jumped in and went and started another fantastic company called Gravitational.io. They're doing fantastic. And then, at that time, Mailgun was about 25 employees, half of the original team, half of, hosting folks. And we knew we had something because this thing was growing, and we were only investing technologically. We were doing very little, almost no go-to-market investment. So in the process of doing that, we kind of had a wild idea. Why don't we take this business and spin it out? Rackspace was divesting some of its assets, just divested Jungle Disk. So we said, let's go approach Rackspace and go give this thing a new life. I went back to my old buddy and really the technical mind for Mailgun, now Pathwire, Josh. And he agreed to come back to Rackspace, which he had just left to go to a startup. And we built a profile that investors would be excited by. And we attracted one of the best ones, in my opinion, Turn River Capital. And, these guys had come in on a $100 million fund, and, Mailgun was 50 million of that. So they made a big bet on us. Yeah. And, their gifting is really in the go-to-market orientation, because as I said, all of our investment had gone into the technical side at that point. So we spun out, and all those people that trusted us and worked with us for those 3 years that inside of Rackspace, where we were trying to kind of give it its own life, they all got equity in the company, and we had a fantastic 2-year journey with Turn River, and then boom, Twilio buys SendGrid. The 900-pound gorilla gets bought by the, I guess, 1,800-pound gorilla. And we knew, organic growth wasn't enough for us anymore. We had to go out there and aspire to greater things. So we traded up to turn to Thoma Bravo, which, is a huge private equity. They know how to do scaling of your back-end infrastructure incredibly well, meaning more of your systems. And they know how to go out there and acquire companies. So that's what we did. And, 2 or 3 months after that, we acquire Mailjet. And now you have, 2 different components of the sending ecosystem, if you will. You have that, raw industrial power API sending platform that can burst to about 1 million a minute in terms of sending. It's the fastest, most powerful sending infrastructure in the world for email. And you've got this, front end component, which was something that we were always lacking. And we didn't want to divest our investment in Mailgun, because that's really been the key to our success. It's been making sure that this stays relevant for developers. And this is always, going to be a product first oriented company. But now for those, especially SMBs, they have this, great front end that they can bolt on to an already fantastic sending infrastructure, and, send segmentation. And really, they have a fantastic front end component that you can actually take an MJML, an open source project that we have, and take the iframe and rebuild your own template editor, so that you can see in real time, editing templates, who's doing it, who shouldn't be doing it, lock them down. So that's something that franchises have really enjoyed. And then, because we are fundamentally developers and engineers at heart, we don't like any kind of black box. And that's probably the biggest complaint that most people have around email. And, it's not just the sending component, but what happened after the sending, and is it doing what you intended to do? So we built out these other deliverability assets that have been just crucial for us, giving fantastic support to our customers. Built them API forward so that you could take them and resell them. But one is our validation API, so that you're ensuring that you're getting the emails that you intend to get, and you're, keeping yourself from bot attacks. And, the phrase that we use with our customers is trash in, trash out. You don't want to go and spend your whole value chain collecting all of this information, or collecting all these customers in your top of funnel, get all the way down to the point of capture, and then you accept the wrong email address, or, your system's down for whatever reason. And then just the hygiene, the curation of your list is vital to having good sending. Then, a lot of people don't know. Nobody really can tell you where your emails go after they get the 250 OK. Every postmaster has a little bit of a different opinion about what information to give back to the customer, because they're constantly fighting spam, and they should be, because that keeps all of our industry relevant. So we have what's called inbox placements, so that you can actually see through seed testing, or, we'll set up tens of thousands of inboxes all across the different postmasters, and ensure that you seed your tests before you send them. So you don't send this, multi-million campaign that ends up going where you didn't intend it, to spam at the worst, a tab that you didn't like at the probably neutral, and then send time optimization, because we know the email addresses and the interactions that they're in, and, have that interaction with our infrastructure. We can actually place and send the emails at the time with which they're most likely to get interacted, which is, something that only really somebody who's sending over 22 billion emails on a very regular basis can do. And we offer that up to our customers. So, that needed its own component. So now you have your email API, your industrial email API. You got your front end that sits on top of it. Then you've got these deliverability components that all kind of orchestrate the whole thing and make sure it works. So, we decided we're really not just one thing anymore. We've kind of grown out of that, or I should say, evolved into something else. And that's where we really came up with the name Pathwire. We wanted to go to a house of brand strategy that made sure people knew, what our intentions were. Our intentions are to focus on these three components primarily and invest in them independently, make sure that they're best of breed. I think the name is a little bit romantic because we have always had to find our path, to continuing to make sure that this fantastic technology has the best light of day. And I think we've succeeded in that. So the name kind of represents our intentions a little bit. So it's been an incredible journey, man. And I've been 8 years into this. I was a general manager when we went in, and I was, mentored by the founders who, always held us accountable on the technological side. And we had great advisors in Thomas Bravo and Turner River Capital. So this has just been a phenomenal journey for all of us. And we're so excited to still see the amazing growth that we have. And, so now we have this crazy culture where it's a little bit San Francisco, a little bit San Antonio, Austin, Paris, London, Germany. So just watching
the internet, man.
Together, it's been crazy.
It is. I'm listening to you, Will, and I first of all, where were you when I needed you about 15, 20 years ago? But, I've been involved and I've watched this email industry grow. One of all the venture-backed companies that I've done, the money behind it was Brad Feld, whether he was at SoftBank and then Mobius and then Foundry Group, Techstars. And Brad's made a ton of investments in email over the years, right? Email security, email deliverability. SendGrid. SendGrid's a Techstars company. Brad was an investor. I know the founders of SendGrid. Great story. And of course, Twilio bought them. But not just SendGrid. I'm trying to think, Return Path. I don't know if you remember those guys.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
So when I was in the Mobius incubator with one of the companies I started, we shared it with Return Path. We were both starting up back then. And so I've watched the email industry grow, right? And a lot of the issues that you're talking about are issues that I experienced firsthand, and I've seen people, right? And I've seen companies try to solve these issues as well. They're real issues. What I find fascinating is with Slack and Zoom and everything we got going on today, email's still the backbone of so much of our communication.
It really is, and I think it's going to stay that way. These other technologies are fantastic. It allows us to really circle the customer and interact with them in the way they most want. But email, nobody owns it and nobody's going to own it. And it's got third-party regulation.
It's still, I'll tell you something, as someone here at MediaOps, right? We do a fair amount of email, as you can imagine, right? And, we have all kinds of, we do webinars, we do virtual events, we do a lot of activities. Dollar for dollar, penny for penny, pound for pound, email is still the best medium to reach people with. We have a lot of social media. I spend a fortune on social media. But, email probably still accounts for 85% of people who come to our events and so forth came because of email. So
they say it has the second highest ROI in all the different channels. And now that you're getting into, browser regulation, that's starting to really increase the ROI of email. People are still going back and saying, this is the primary form with which we interact with the internet. I mean, it's where I stay, it's where I live. And
it is
that we have the regulation on it. It's so important. It's gonna keep it relevant.
Yeah, I mean, and that's been a big boon, right? Is I remember I sold my first company to Brad. It was a hosting company, and my two ex-partners back then went into the email business, email marketing, and some of it was unsavory, frankly. And they ran afoul of the can't spam laws and all of these things. But really, when you look back, these can't spam laws and a lot of the regulations saved the email industry because, it's otherwise, where would we be? We'd be totally unusable with all the nonsense. But one thing I have noticed, and I'm interested in your take on this, is with COVID, I seem to be getting more email than I ever got before. Have you guys seen this, or is there any, what do you think is the reason behind it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things when, there's been a lot of people who have marketed themselves in traditional means. And, in the midst of the pandemic, they've had to go out there and make sure that they're keeping engagement high and that they're reaching their customers where they need to be. And, email is something that we all interact with regardless of, where you are in your persona. So I think as the world, really, even as it comes back online from this kind of whole pandemic, you're still going to see that we always go back to our email and making sure that it can engage with us in a way that's intended to engage with us, and it doesn't, get, how do I say this? It doesn't become a nuisance. That's vital. So making sure that you really understand the entire life cycle of what's happening with the email is crucial, because as you're seeing, Alan, if you're going out there and you're blasting to your people all the time, you're going to fatigue them. And even worse, if you end up and you kind of aggressively take on email practices that, are, let's not even call them unsavory, let's just call them a little bit gray or marginal, you're going to diminish your deliverability, and it's going to be harder to reach your clientele. So, this life cycle of the email chain, that's just something that Pathwire has really invested itself in. We want to make sure that it's not just about getting things out at the fastest, matching the speed of light as best you can. It really is making sure that you understand what's the personality and the persona of the people that you're engaging with, and how do they want to be engaged with? What are their cycles for opening and reading? And that's one of the counterintuitive things that Pathwire's done is we'll actually go in through our managed offering where you have a technical account manager who's equally potent at both the API components and deliverability. And we'll go and we'll bring these customers in on contract. And the first thing it's our job to do is say, okay, where can you improve your deliverability? And most of the time it's send less email, send more pointed email that's, targeted to the customer, but send less, and make sure that when you do send it, you're adding value with every single interaction. And it's kind of a counterintuitive thing for an email company to advocate for people to actually send less. But that's what we find most often is, as long as you're relevant in every interaction and you are adding value, then your customers really appreciate it. And emails continue to get more content rich. There's more things you can do with email today.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like the sales orientation of it. It's, when you are seeing behaviors, being to author that back up to be helpful for the customer and anticipate what they're doing. So I'm excited to see where the industry goes, and that we're so happy to be a part of it and to be ushering it in. And you mentioned SendGrid, they did a great job when they went out there and were public of just saying exactly what we're saying, which is email is still incredibly relevant. We're seeing that in the reporting of Twilio. It's a great time to be in, a communication platform.
It's always been a great time to be in email. I don't care what anyone says.
That's right.
But hey, man, Will, we're over time. I gotta cut us off here. But you know what? People want more information. What website they go to?
Pathwire.com. You can go to Mailgun. You can go to Mailjet.
No. I'm going to play marketing guy for you. You rebranded. They go to Pathwire.com.
That's right.
That's the brand. All right.
Sounds great to
hey,
me.
Will, thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV. Come on, tell us more, and maybe in a couple of weeks or months. Well, not too many months. Come back and visit us, and let's continue the conversation.
That sounds great, Alan. It's been a pleasure.
All righty. Will Conway, CEO of Pathwire at Pathwire.com. All about email. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest.
The security landscape is evolving rapidly in the face of disruption. Growing cyber threats, a global pandemic, and other factors have irrevocably changed the way organizations view and adopt security technologies. Cybersecurity 2021, the new normal, will bring together thought leaders, security experts, and IT professionals in the new security landscape and what's ahead in the years to come. On topics ranging from ransomware to DevSecOps, from speakers including Chen Zi Wang of Rain Capital, Richard Steenan of IT Harvest, and Ira Winkler of Secure Mentum. Visit MediaOps.com/cybersecurity2021 to register.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We have a great special announcement now. Alan Schimmel is going to be talking with Joe Russo, who is with the Tech Hub South Florida, and Todd Albert over at Boca Code. They're going to be talking about 2 scholarships that Media Ops is funding here in the South Florida community. It's called the Engineer the Change Scholarship from over at Boca Code. Great conversation. Let's give it a listen. We're super proud about this one.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. I've got 2 really special guests I want to introduce you to for this segment, and we're going to be making what for us here in the South Florida area, I think is a pretty cool announcement. Let me first introduce you to my friend Joe Russo. Joe is the CEO of Tech Hub South Florida. Hey Joe, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks so much for having me, Alan.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you here, my friend. And then joining Joe and I, is making his first appearance here on TechStrong TV, I hope not his last, is Todd Albert. Todd is the founder, CEO of a new operation, a first of its kind here in the South Florida area, called Boca Code. Hey, Todd, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Morning, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's a pleasure to have you here, Todd. We're going to jump in a little bit, guys, to talk about Tech Hub South Florida. And Joe, you guys recently had a renaming branding, and we're going to talk about that a bit. And Todd, I want you to tell the whole audience about Boca Code. But before we do, let's break the news. And I'm really excited to announce that collectively, Boca Code and Media Ops today have announced something called Engineer the Change Scholarship. And it's a scholarship for 2 students a year to start that Media Ops is going to fund for 2 students to attend the Boca Code sort of immersive 10-week program. And it really is a pretty immersive, intense program with the goal of that these people come out of this program with all the tools they need to land a great software developer, software operations, a career in technology. And we're aiming these scholarships at minority disadvantaged populations, whether they be gender-based, race, economic-based, where we want to diversify the workforce, as well as add to the workforce here in South Florida. Joe's going to talk a little bit about that with us. And you know, if this wouldn't be possible, though, without the great program that Todd and the Boca Code folks have put together. So if you go to MediaOps.com, I think right off the first page, you'll see a link to Engineer the Change Scholarship. If you're watching this, you can apply for that scholarship right now. The first 10-week cohort kicks off, I believe, in April, and we're accepting applications for the next 2 weeks. It's just a 500-word essay. So really excited. Todd, congratulations on Engineer the Change. I'm excited to be partnering with you on it. And also, before I go to both of you, I want to also say this. I'm going to challenge all of our South Florida tech companies, and there's a lot, and not just tech companies, every company is a software company. I'm going to challenge all South Florida companies out there. Get behind these kinds of initiatives. You don't want to do this, go do something else. But you got to talk the talk and walk the walk if we're going to make South Florida truly a tech hub. So with that being said, Joe, I want to kick it over to you, and let's talk a little bit about the South Florida tech scene. It's exploding. You guys are a big part of it. Recently, as I mentioned, rebranded. Tell our audience a bit.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Alan. And, as you said, I'm the CEO of Tech Hub South Florida. We are a technology association and trade organization for the technology companies here in South Florida. What that means, we have some really great companies that are building our tech hub by building their teams here in South Florida. So you have a really rich history here in South Florida. A history a lot of people don't realize, where we have the invention of the personal computer down here. We built rockets that put the Saturn V Apollo missions up to the moon, right? And now in the 21st century, we have some of the greatest startup minds that are going on through South Florida here with us today. So apologize. I thought it would be a really nice day to take some of the phone call outside, but that seemed to that seems to be our COVID lifestyle, right? It's like, hey, let's go outside, let's enjoy a nice day, and then we have this going on. So anyway, I'll pitch it back.
Great, thank you, Joe. Todd, introduce Boca Code. Introduce yourself and Boca Code to the audience, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. So I'm Dr. Todd Albert. I've been coding for almost 40 years now. Took a little break and went into academia. I was a college professor, scientist. Had a little run as a NASA research fellow. And when I moved back to South Florida, I became a software engineer, and it was great because as you said, there's so many jobs for software engineers. So as an engineer, it was amazing for me. I had my pick of jobs. I could, basically set my own salary. And but then when I started having to hire people, it was really a challenge finding the talent. There's just, there's great talent here. There's just not enough of it. And so so with my education background and my engineering background, I thought it would be a perfect fit to start a code school where we're teaching adults. You don't have to have any previous experience. You don't technically need a college degree or anything like that. You could come here for 10 weeks, learn how to be a software engineer. And if you're already a software engineer, we have advanced courses. If you're just thinking about it, we have short courses to dip your toe in. So, but we've got something for everyone, and we're really, all the companies here in South Florida, they're really hungry for local talent. So, we're just trying to get people to come in, get them trained, and get them into jobs as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. I wanted to touch on something Joe said, because he got kind of drowned out by the wind out there. And that is that, look, South Florida, even Boca Raton, Boca Code, right, where I live and work in Boca Raton. Boca Raton has a very rich history of tech, right? The IBM PC was developed here, as well as many other innovations that, exploded the PC market and the tech market. There's a local middle school here called Don Estridge Technical School, named for Don Estridge, who was the IBM. Yeah, that was the IBM manager. Parker Yates, our CRO, actually worked for Don Estridge at IBM in the 80s. And, it has that rich history. As we were talking off camera, 18 years here, I think one of the biggest things holding us back is a lack of a critical mass of technical talent. We have no shortage of fundraising, quite frankly. It's a pretty good area in terms of wealth. We have no shortage of entrepreneurial spirit looking at businesses. What we have a shortage of, though, is that, and we're not the only one, this is a worldwide thing, we have enough tech software engineers. We don't have enough technical folks with technical training. And that's why this, Todd, what you're doing with Boca Code is so, I think, so important, frankly. But Todd, this isn't just, as you mentioned, it's for adults. It's not like a middle school, kind of class, or even a college class. It's for adults. But there's more. There's a hands-on aspect to what you're doing with Boca Code and the training. Tell our audience a little bit.
Yeah, so our staff is all of our teaching staff. We're senior engineers, and we actually take on projects for mostly local, mostly small companies. Although you don't have to be local and you don't have to be small. We have some larger companies we work with as well. We take on these projects, and our senior staff get to work on these. So we get to stay fresh, and we bring them into the classroom as case studies, and we give our students actually opportunities to work on these projects. So it's more almost like a teaching hospital kind of a model, where the students get to work on real projects. They get to, get their hands in there. Unlike a teaching hospital, though, if they clip the wrong place, it's no problem. We can, on computers, you always have Control Z. You can always undo. So it's a lot safer, but it's really great. They're getting to actually learn real world what it's like to work in the industry.
Fantastic. Yes, it's not like we're doing transplants. Joe, I don't know if the wind has died down by you. Are you comfortable to come back on audio?
Always comfortable to come back on audio. The question is whether or not you can hear me.
Oh, we hear you. You just sound like a little bit like you might be doing a hurricane forecast or something.
Oh, but, you know, once in my life I wanted to be Jim
Steve
Cantori.
Weagle?
Yeah, that
Jim
too.
Cantori,
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll go about it because there's actually an interesting connection I'd like to make here. You know, because through COVID-19, this last year has been kind of an odd horse race, right? You're trying to get through it and weaving in and out and seeing where you get. But because of that, we've become so detached from a physical space that a lot of people have been able to move to South Florida. Right? A lot of people who enjoy the lifestyle that we have here in our community want to be a part of our future. And we have top-notch people moving down from New York City, Chicago, Silicon Valley, California, that would have never been able to move here had they been so committed and restrained to these companies and these cultures that said, hey, you got to be in the office. And because of that, we have a lot of people moving here. We have a lot of people giving South Florida a shot. And this is really our opportunity to make our technology renaissance, as it were, happen here in 2021, get kickstarted, and really carry through for years to come. So it's really exciting what you guys are doing, because the biggest issue in front of us is talent and our talent pipeline. And by putting this together, you're going to be able to do some good for people, but it's also sending a big message. And that's something we need right now too. And I'm really proud of both of you guys for getting together and saying, hey, we're going to make a difference in whatever way we can, and hopefully other people follow suit. And I hope that the people watching this and tuning in to the message you're sending really follow suit, and you take your leadership to bear and say, hey, we're going to build South Florida into a tech hub together.
Absolutely. You know what I forgot to mention, guys? The three of us are actually the scholarship selection committee. So these essays that people are filling out, whether it be on the Boca Code site or on the Media Ops site, they're actually going to Joe, Todd, and I, and we will evaluate them and make the selection. One scholarship is, as I mentioned, for the April time frame, and one will be awarded around September. And we're going to do this annually, so it'll be 2 a year for the next couple of years. Hopefully we'll be able to increase. But thank you, both for serving on that as well. Just other kind of housekeeping. You don't have to live in South Florida today to apply for this, but what we do ask is that, if you're going to go through the course, and these are not cheap, they're $10,000 scholarships. If you're going to do it, you're going to stay in South Florida to help, pay it forward, give it back to the community here. So if you're thinking about moving to South Florida and a career in tech, this is a great opportunity for that as well. So, do check that out. Todd, COVID, everything else, I know it's been hard starting a business in the middle of all of it. Tell our audience a little bit, maybe, what have been some of the challenges and what have been some of the innovations you've done to launch in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, we started this company. We started Boca Code a couple of months before the pandemic hit, and I had actually all of my investors lined up. And the pandemic hit, the market crashed, and most of my investors pulled out on before we even had a chance to to open the school. So that was an early hit, but we pushed forward. We've gotten a lot of new investment. And, one of the things that we found is, number one is during the pandemic, you see a lot of people lost their jobs, but not the software engineers, right? So, maybe you're not a software engineer, but you lost your job. You saw people around you lose your job, but you see your friends who, as a software engineer, we transitioned to working from home, just by grabbing our laptop, maybe taking a plant off of our desk, and we could work from home. So it's a great career. But what was interesting, we started teaching online, and the students were really demanding while we were building out this space. This isn't a virtual background behind me. This is the school. And while we were building out this space, our students were demanding to learn in person. They really want to have that hands-on. So, we're having to keep distanced. We have half of the desks pulled out of the classroom to keep people safe. We're taking every kind of precaution we can, but we're also, we're also, students are demanding to come learn here at the school, and it's been great. So we have some online classes, but most of the classes are here in person.
Todd, I also want to ask you if you can explain to our audience, look, if you're not up to this 10-week intense class, because it's not for everyone, that's a full-time gig, right? Basically, you need to do that. But if you're looking to, take a slower route to software engineering careers, you guys do offer individual classes. What are the kinds of classes you offer?
Yeah, we have a variety of short classes, from introductory, learning just introduction to web dev, then, moving up to Node and JavaScript, and then React, mobile development. We move all the way up into more advanced courses like architecture and cloud engineering. We also have a lot of, introductory classes for other people. We have a game development course that's really fun, where you learn AR and VR. And we just introduced a brand new technical communication course, which is really geared towards, your non-technical startup founder that wants to make sure they understand what their developers are saying, and they can explain things properly to their development team, and not run into trouble.
What a great idea that is, man. Where were you when I needed you? Another great course that I saw, and I highly recommend, we have a bunch of people here in MediaOps signing up for classes. One of them was around UI, UX design, which is such an important piece of the puzzle, right? Whether we're talking about, we're going to one day move away from Zoom, Brady Bunch, Hollywood Squares interfaces, I hope, right, for this. And designing those interfaces of tomorrow for virtual events, for applications, for mobile, it's such an important piece of the puzzle that quite frankly, a lot of people are lacking formal training in. So,
and one of the other classes that a lot of your folks are signing up for is our data analytics class, where you actually learn some AI and machine learning and Python, and how to compile large data sets and get knowledge from it, which is incredibly important for every business.
Really important for us here as well. It is crazy. Guys, we're running out of time. Let me wrap things up. First of all, Todd, for people who want to, not just for the Engineer the Change Scholarship, but for anyone interested in Boca Code, where do they go?
Yeah, just check us out online, www.bocacode.com. Or give us a call, 561-564-0075. We'd love to talk to you about the program and all the options.
Very cool. Joe, for anyone who's interested in the South Florida tech scene, coming here, funding companies, starting companies, whatever, your place is the place to go, but how do they get there?
Go to techhubsouthflorida.org today. Find us on all the social medias. You can get us anywhere. Follow along with what's going on. Sign up for our emails. Just see how you can be a part by following all of the good news that we're sharing of everything going on down here. South Florida is the place to be for technology for 2021 and beyond, because of people like you who are taking a leadership role. So thank you very much for guiding a lot of people here to South Florida to join us.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for all the work you and the team there are doing. I will mention, look, almost every day of the week there's something at South Florida Tech Hub virtually, whether it's a coffee talk or tech talks in the afternoon or what have you. So please go check that out. Guys, it is Engineer the Change Scholarship. You can get to it off the MediaOps.com site. Again, I'd love to see other companies down here, or they don't have to be down here. Maybe you want to be down here, get behind this kind of effort. Joe, Todd, thank you. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have Brendan O'Leary in his monthly GitLab installment called The Lab, in which Brendan offers up what's happening over at GitLab this month. So let's give it a listen.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to The Lab. It's a monthly show where we look at the latest and greatest developments in software development, DevOps, and the cloud. I'm your host, Brendan O'Leary, and I'm coming to you today from mostly sunny Annapolis, Maryland, on the East Coast of the United States. For those who don't know me, I'm a developer evangelist at GitLab, which means I get to talk to amazing folks throughout software engineering space and open source about what it really means to get code shipped to production. And today I just have a couple of topics to talk about. First, we'll talk a little bit about the latest GitLab release, as we always do. And then I'll have a special guest here to talk about some of GitLab's most key core values and how we focus on those and try to live up to those values, as well as how they have aided GitLab in our growth. So we'll get to that in just a second. But first, let's talk about the latest release of GitLab that came out on February 22nd, rather, and that is GitLab 13.9. There's some really great features in this. As always, I highly recommend you go to the blog, search for GitLab 13.9 on Google or your favorite search engine, and you'll find it. So you can read all of the great features, but there's a couple that I wanted to highlight really quickly that I think really are going to have a big impact on users and our customers when it comes to using GitLab. The first and most critical, I think, is the updates to our security alerts dashboard. So this allows teams to triage priority issues across multiple projects and groups. So this is really critical for customers that have lots of teams using GitLab and want to use GitLab to, make their code more secure, but don't necessarily want to do that on a project by project basis, but instead want to see a view over the entire system. And so I think this is really critical. It's going to help minimize downtime and disruptions for end users by alerting you to issues that are coming up as they're being introduced to the code rather than after the fact. Another key feature that a lot of customers have asked for is maintenance mode. So GitLab already supports the ability to upgrade with no downtime. If you have multiple servers, there's a whole article on our documentation you can read about that. But for many folks, with distributed teams that may be moving data centers or making other changes outside of GitLab, they might want to be able to put GitLab into kind of a, maintenance or read-only mode to do some of those more administrative tasks. And so now you have the ability to flip a switch and GitLab will be in read-only mode. Your users can still read and see everything, but won't be able to write to it until your admins are done with that maintenance and flip it back on. Another feature that I'm really, really excited about is DORA metrics support. So the key 4 DORA metrics are now supported directly within GitLab. That gives you better visibility so that you can see at a group level, what are the analytics for your team? This gives you kind of an aggregated view of all of the metrics for your team and each project inside, as well as what it looks like at a group level. And those 4 DORA metrics will let you compare yourself to industry as they're proven through data to be the most critical metrics when it comes to supporting DevOps teams and seeing how effective you are in shipping code faster and securely. Another big addition that's near and dear to my heart is an expansion of version control of the CI/CD configuration. So you can now version the pipeline configuration with all of the includes and extends configuration merged together so that you can understand these complex pipeline flows and really see what is this pipeline going to look like in the end once all of the extends and includes have been calculated. Let's see what that looks like and really debug it line by line. And last, there's advanced automation capabilities coming for CI/CD, right? We want to focus on delivering better products faster. And 13.9 allows you to reuse the pipeline configuration from any job, even if that job is in another file. This will let teams scale their CI/CD across the organization a lot more efficiently. Like I said, if you have any questions about that or want to learn more, find the blog on GitLab 13.9, but those are just some of the key features I wanted to point out. So the other thing I wanted to talk about today is, an effort to highlight additional work we do at GitLab beyond the code we produce, right? And we want to talk about our efforts around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and and how that works in DevOps. And it's really fundamental to our success. You've heard me talk about GitLab's values before. Those spell credit, they're collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, iteration, and transparency. And we talk about those values at GitLab more than any company I've ever been to talks about their values. And that's great, right? It allows us to have this transparent environment. It allows us to really focus on results. But having diversity, inclusion, and belonging as a key one of those values that we talk about really allows us to focus on making sure we're having a globally diverse team, we're hearing everyone's voices, we're creating an environment where people can show up as their full selves and contribute to GitLab. And I think I personally have learned a whole lot about that in my time at GitLab. I've been at GitLab since 2017, and we've gone from 150 people in a handful of countries to over 1,300 people in 65 different countries and regions. And I just think that I've been able to grow so much as a person from not only meeting all of these folks with different backgrounds and from different walks of life, but also being able to talk about our diversity and what those dimensions are, and be focused on including all of those in our collaboration. And so to talk more about that, I've brought onto the show today Candace Birdsong Williams, who focuses on diversity, inclusion, and belonging at GitLab, to give her perspective on diversity in DevOps. So Candace, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I am doing great and so happy that you asked me to join you today, because I instantly light up. I have a huge passion for this. I have seen the work that you've done right when I arrived at GitLab and said he's definitely going to be an ambassador for diversity and inclusion at the time, now Dev as we call it. We can talk a little bit about that as well as in the future conversations here. But yeah, just excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I don't think I wrote this question down, but let me make this first question for you. When I started at GitLab, the value was D for diversity, and we've iterated on that value to now be diversity, inclusion, belonging, or DIB, like you say. And I think I've really learned, again, a lot about that and about how those extra two words kind of make it a lot more actionable in what we do with each other. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that change and why that use of terminology is so important.
Absolutely. So what I would like to start with, even take a step back further, is that when I think about DevOps in general and my speaking in the past on those, really I like for people to kind of lean into the fact there are a lot of similar methodologies when you think about how you apply that to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, even in the way that you kind of build things, everyone contributes, you iterate, you break it, you fix it, you pivot, you turn, and you arrive at a place where everyone has contributed to, the work that's being accomplished. And when I first arrived at GitLab, correct, it was just a value by itself with diversity. Then it was like, well, do we want to continue to call this diversity and then adding on inclusion? And what are the team members saying? So I sent out a diversity specific survey to the company, because what I always know and hear in my past experiences is it's not okay to kind of include a few questions on the engagement survey. It loses its kind of thoughts and feedback. So, when I did the specific survey, I read through 875 comments. You can have a lot of data, which is great, but those subjective comments mean the world. And so I pulled things from that. And one of the things that I pulled was the sense of belonging. And you can't have diversity without inclusion, but you also have to have what the team members at any company are thinking about and use that to say, this is what they want. So let's give them what they want if this is going to make them even more productive and feel more included. And so when I think of diversity, I think of all the layers that make up who we are, the things that we can see in both yourself and myself, and the things that you can't see. And then when it comes to inclusion, I say to myself, these are all of those layers that we talked about, but you still have an opportunity to have a seat at the table and you feel a sense of purpose. And then when you think of the belonging is being able to show up as your full self, and you take risks. You feel really comfortable to take risks, and you say to yourself, there's a consistent track record. So if I break the Git tool, if I do something wrong, my team members, my managers, they're going to still be consistent in their responses, which really confirms that there's a sense of belonging for me. When I speak up, it doesn't mean that they have to say, I'm going to go along with what Candace said, but acknowledging my voice is another element of that belonging. And so, and also being able, again, to just show up in those full layers of who I am, and it's not going to change the outcome. I'm going to feel more embraced, if anything. And so that's how I like to consider diversity, inclusion, and belonging.
That's really helpful, Candace. Like, I think that explanation is something I've heard you give before, and I've seen you write down a lot because we write things down at GitLab, but like every time I feel like I get something out of hearing you talk about it. It's so great. And I think that, each of those three words being so important, like you said, to make people really feel like, I mean, again, it's kind of a little trite maybe, but we've got this mission of everyone can contribute. And like, again, each of those words, like, of course, diversity means everyone means everyone. But can contribute means like are listened to and feel like they have a voice and can add something to what's going on. And so I agree, like that idea of diversity, inclusion, and belonging has really, rounded out that value for me, not only at work, but just in my life in general, right? Like just as I'm, meeting people every day. But I mean, it's like it's great. And again, I really hope people listen to what you say and read all the great handbook posts that you've written. But I think in the end, like, it's tough, right? Like we're in an industry that, traditionally has not had a great track record around diversity and inclusion. And so if I'm, running a DevOps team today, what can I do if I want to be, an advocate, I want to be an ally, I want to, bring diversity and inclusion and belonging to my team? What do you think I can do?
Oh my gosh, Brendan, so much. And, the first thing that I always go to is intentionality. So, and people are like, well, I know what intentionality means. But what does that mean in terms of diversity and what, in specific, what can I do still? When I think about moments in my career that mattered, where there was a person who said, let me give Candace an opportunity. So, not just because Candace is a Black female, but because she is qualified by merit to do this role or to take on this task. And so, even for the things that you can't see that are outwardly seen, whether it's race or gender or things like that, for the things that you cannot see. And so, I don't know for you, Brendan, what those moments were in your career where someone said, let me, put Brendan out there, because I'm sure you didn't start out in the great role that you are today. It took effort. It took other people. It took mentors. It took allies. It took voices when you weren't in the room to say, how great is he? Like, what are, these things that he has done? He's accomplished so much. And, it's being that advocate, it's being an ally. And even when you think about allyship, I think a lot of people in general sometimes just think, kind of get confused with championing it to a degree where you need to be beside someone versus being in front of them. So that allyship is, let me walk beside you. I'm going to still want you to guide it because you're the person that's of this particular dimension, but I'm going to support you. I'm going to advocate for you. And when I think about things in your hiring process, you want to be the face of what you want to attract. So if a job description doesn't seem like it's achievable by someone who is not at this company at this time, then we need to revisit our job descriptions. Mm-hmm. If in the hiring process, everyone on the interview team looks different, then how do I know how I can see myself at the company during that process if I don't see myself in the process? Mm-hmm. When it comes to promotions, being able to say, did I do my best job as a leader within the company to really go with someone that is of an underrepresented group or something different? It's going to be easy to go with the majority. And one of the things I have said before is that when you're building a company, you sometimes build the company with the affinity of those who have similar work that you're trying to accomplish. And you're not necessarily doing it with the level of intentionality to do that. You're doing it because that's going to help get the project done to build a company. But then you look back and you say, wow, I've built a lot of people who look like me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that intentionality shows up in that way that you have to just really think a little bit different and think about what kind of team you want. Even when you think about our product and it being in DevOps and how many people are contributing to it. I bet if we did some level of metrics, we would be able to see how many are in neurodiverse aspect, how many are things that we can't see, like ADHD, bipolar, autism, that are contributing, who may not show up at work to be one that has a vocal voice like everyone else, but they're able to, in a quiet way, contribute to the product itself to be better. And think about how great the Git tool is, because we do have so many contributors globally doing that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think what you brought up about the hiring process is so key. I mean, that's obviously a point where you have to be super intentional if you, again, don't want to build a company that just looks and thinks like you. And I think it's so critical because we know that, that diversity and that, that set of different viewpoints in the world is what's going to really help in, a global world where software is winning, where, we've been all remote, but now the world is all remote, and it's starting to break down a lot of those barriers that may have even just been physical barriers before. I think it's so important. And then, I always think about how important it is right after someone's hired too. Like I've always tried to be super intentional about like you go through all this effort to hire a person, and you end up, whether you're right or wrong, at the end you think, oh, we got the best person for this role because we just spent so much time. They're the smartest person we could have hired. And that's true. And like for the new hire, I always try to emphasize that with them. I'm like, we hired you for like a key reason. This is through my whole career. It's like, we hired you for a reason, and we didn't hire you to do things that we've already been doing. Like we hired you to make us better. We didn't hire you to become part of us. Like we wanted you to make us better. And that's something I always really try to think about.
Yeah, that retention is like an important factor. I say all the time, you can attract and bring in the best talent in the world, but what are you going to do to keep them? Think about how, Gitlab was already a remote company before the pandemic happened. And a lot of companies had to then pivot and say to themselves, how do we create what GitLab already has? And so in that same application, you say to yourself, we're unique in the fact that let's bring that talent in. But are we setting team members up for success? And what do we need to do internally to really continue to have that diverse talent? So we have our TMRGs as an example. We have 6. I won't go through them all, but I'll be happy to hand out the resources that we have available. But we have 6. And so when we have different things that we're working on, whether it was the Black Lives Matter movement that happened earlier this year, what we say to ourselves in a way is that, one of the things that was said to me by Sid is that, we think about how we're going to respond. And in the past, we didn't have a certain social justice response. But what we decided on was sometimes it's bad not to say anything. That's a problem in itself. And so knowing that all team members matter, it was one of those moments that we had to say to ourselves, because this is what we're doing. So we had a fireside chat through one of our TMRGs with Sid and had him talk to the leaders within that group, but not only talking to the leaders in that group, but to the company at large about what is it like to be Black in tech? What does that mean? What have your experiences been? And so just like we're having this dialogue right now, when I think about how that kind of changed the element of the moment to have put things and conversations in the forefront, it kind of takes the elephant out the room where you don't have to have the water cooler conversations because you're having them in a level of transparency in front of the entire company. And it was a powerful moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about that being a powerful moment because, again, I'm now talking from my experience, but like for me, that meeting, and then we also did a meeting with the LGBTQ plus group.
I was going to talk about
National Coming Out Day, and those 2 meetings are 2 of my favorite meetings I've ever been in any company in my entire life because. And here's why. It's like everything else with transparency. We talk about how transparency allows people to learn, allows people to, answer questions they might not have known they had, or they were too embarrassed to ask, or they didn't know how to ask. Like those kind of, it's really important, and I think I've learned, and I think over the past year, a lot of us have learned how important it is to learn and to really, like you said, stand next to someone as an ally and not just stand silently by while they're, going through something that you're like, well, but I know I'm not doing that to them, so it's okay. And so that learning opportunity for us was just so incredible and moving, because it allowed us to do that like very important thing, which is go learn about someone else's experience and be able to stand next to them now, because you understand, you haven't lived their experience, but you've listened to and learned their experience.
And you have empathy. You started having empathy.
Exactly.
And I thought about how, you again have been such an ambassador for diversity, even when it was just a value, whether you showed up with a t-shirt with the Tanuki on it that spoke to a certain dimension and things like that, so that's a level of living in allyship, because you're supporting, whether it's a silent support, whether it's a verbal support, whether it's showing you're in allyship with them. And so when I think about, to your point, the TMRG, the Pride group, and them telling their stories in such a powerful way that I know that I really couldn't count my Slack messages. I probably still have some I haven't read, that they were in tears, or they didn't know that, they had to go through that in that community. And, it's like coming out for some people over and over and over again when you're starting a new company. And so hearing the stories of different diversity dimensions, and, GitLab is so unique that when you give them an opportunity, give us, everyone, an opportunity to speak, be engaged, do whatever it is in your way for your diversity dimension, an acknowledgement of being heard. It goes so far. It goes so far. And it's a ripple effect, because then it becomes contagious, because then people say to themselves, I want to be a part of that, or I want to show up and do my story, or I want to participate and, say something for, or I want to, be engaged on some level, whether it's a manager, individual contributor. It's so powerful because it happens in so many ways after that.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more. It's been life-changing for me. I have 4 small children, and like now I know the way to raise them is to, raise their voices, right? They're not going to have the struggles that a lot of people have. But they are very empathetic kids. Almost to a fault. They're my wife's children, clearly. Like they feel pain. My wife used to talk about when her brother would get in trouble, she would be crying. And like, so they have this empathy in them, and like they can turn that into action. So I think that's really, really a valuable lesson that I've learned. It's markedly made my life and my family's life better.
But you called it. It's learned behaviors. And so a lot of, just touching a little bit on training, just with that as a segue, you think about when people come from other companies and their lived experiences and things like that, behaviors are learned. They're not automatically just given at birth. They are learned. So if you're teaching your children to have empathy, and others are, having a moment to kind of have some introspective looks at themselves to say, wow, was that a good behavior? Or I don't like to use the term bad. I hate to say that. Or is that a behavior that's really helping build others up or contribute to the efforts in a positive way? And so, behaviors are a big, big, big key to changing the environment when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and belonging as well.
Great. Well, Candace, we could talk probably all day. And I really appreciate you coming on. I think, I really would recommend folks to, go to our values page on our handbook, go to our diversity. What would the page be, like your top level page that your team's responsible for?
That would be about GitLab, company culture, diversity, inclusion, belonging. But just for a quick
search for diversity, inclusion, belonging, GitLab, they'll find it. Okay, yes. Great. Yeah, I always tell people to Google it anyway. It's fine. that's awesome.
Yeah, so please feel free to take that as well. It was just recently launched, and so it's available not only internally, but externally when you want to learn about how it all comes together holistically.
Thank you so much. And where can people find you on the internet, Candace?
Candace Birdsong Williams at LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to provide that link and available in the document that we'll share out. But it's Candace Birdsong Williams, BYRDSONG.
Great. Hey, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
And to everyone else, thanks for joining us on this episode of The Lab. I have one last thing to plug today, and it's important. This is a really important piece that we use, and it's something we're always pushing to get more diverse voices in. So I would encourage everyone that's listening to go fill out our DevSecOps survey. It's our 2021 survey. We've been doing this DevSecOps survey for, 4 or 5 years at this point. And so we're really eager to hear what you think about software development, how your teams are working together, your role in your organizations, how the journey is progressing. The data that you provide in the survey, we aggregate and we share that out in an awesome report every year. So you can go to about.gitlab.com/2021-survey to fill that out, and we'd really appreciate it. And again, that's it for this episode of the Lab, but we'll be back next month with another great release from GitLab and hopefully some more fun guests. And so thanks so much for joining us today, and I'll see you next month in the Lab. Stay safe.
All right, everybody, next up is our regular CISO Talk installment. This one is the changing role of the CISO. It includes, obviously, the hosts, Alan Schimmel and Matt Newfield, along with Julie Cullivan, who is a board member at Hardflow, Prasad Ramakrishnan, who is the CIO and CISO at Freshworks, and Mitch Ashley from ASG and Media Ops, talking about how the role of the CISO is changing in organizations and taking on new roles and responsibilities that perhaps have not been part of the traditional role. So great conversation, really speaks to a lot of changes happening in the industry in general. Let's give this one a listen.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of CISO Talk, where we talk to CISOs and about topics that CISOs are interested in, but that you're interested in as well. Today's CISO Talk focuses on the expanding role of the CISO in many organizations. Don't want to get too far down the path without introducing our panel. And I think it's going to be a great discussion. And first of all, I want to introduce you to, and if I mispronounce it, Prasad, I do the best I can here. Prasad Ramakrishnan.
You got it right.
You know, it's not that it's hard to say, Prasad, but I have your name up on the board out there on the monitor. I could barely read without putting on. So I apologize, but good. I'm glad I got it. Prasad, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely, Alan. Hello, everyone. Prasad Ramakrishnan. I'm the CIO and CISO of Freshworks, a customer and employee engagement product company. We're a 10-year-old company solving the problem for customers in the customer and employee engagement space.
Prasad, thank you. Next up, we have, and again, Julie, I apologize, I'm Julie Cullivan.
Yes, Julie Cullivan, you got it.
All right.
Julie Cullivan, yeah, I am the former Chief People Officer and Chief Technology Officer at Forescout. I just recently left in January, but I've worked at several security companies over the years, and both at FireEye and Forescout was responsible for all of IT as well as all of security. So I look forward to the conversation.
I think you're perfect for this conversation. And then joining Prasad and Julie are my two co-hosts. First of all, let me introduce Mitchell Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, as well as CTO at Media Ops. Mitchell, welcome.
Good to be here and love our panel. Hello, everybody.
Hey,
yeah, and we should mention Mitchell also wears the CISO hat at Media Ops. So, you know, continuing a trend. And then continuing that trend is my co-host, our friend Matthew Newfield, who in previous episodes was the CIO of Unisys, but now has another hat too. Matt, why don't you break the news?
Hey, how are you, everybody? Again, Matthew Newfield. I was the CISO at Unisys, and now I am what we are calling the CSIO, or the Chief Security and Infrastructure Officer, which is a combination of CIO and CISO. So I now wear both hats for our corporation. And as always, it's great to be here, Alan.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Matt.
That's awesome.
So you switched the I and the S.
It was
I think we need to come up with a new acronym, right? The combined
there you
CIO
go.
and CISO. We need to come up with a brand new acronym.
Yes.
CSIO.
So how do you pronounce CSIO? And I'm like, seriously, now that's above my pay grade.
Yeah, no, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. So folks, welcome and thank you for joining us today. I have to tell you, as an observer and participant in the security space now for 20 plus years, I sit here and I'm a little bit amazed that the CISO role has reached such heights. I remember fighting with people about whether there should be something called a CISO. And I remember many organizations thought of a CISO as really a glorified security admin who they brought in to maybe architect or set up their security architecture and posture, and then want to push them back down to an admin. And if they didn't, hit the road, right? We got what we needed out of it. The average CISO stayed in for 12 months, 18 months tops, right? So sitting here today and seeing the four of you wearing the CISO hat as well as multiple important hats, running IT, running people, running infrastructure at major companies, it's gratifying, right? I think it's progress. Is it progress? Prasad, what do you think?
Yeah, so if you look at the symptom that you're talking about, where making it top down, where the role of the CISO in some companies where they come up and define the sets of processes and then push it down and then expect admins to actually do the stuff is the wrong way to do it, right? If you look at the role of the CISO, I look at the role of the CISO to be more like the risk guardians of the company, right? It's the job of the CISO to educate, to make aware, and to honestly have an intellectually honest conversation about where we are from an overall security posture perspective, and make the constituents aware, right? Whether it's internal to the company or external to the company, right? So making it more like an afterthought function is the wrong way to do it. And I think that's where some companies have had a disastrous result. If you make it part of your DNA, where you are going to think about security and be intellectually honest about it and look at the role as a risk guardian, then all the kind of pieces start falling into place, where everybody knows why they're highlighting what they're highlighting, why they're asking you to do phishing exercises, why they're asking you to do ship security left, and so on. It kind of then starts resonating, is what I would say.
I'll jump in on that. So, I mean, I completely agree with what Prasad's saying. I guess the one thing I would say is that I think most companies would say, oh, security is really important to us. Oh, yeah, we've got a security DNA. And I mean, I think it really all is not the words, it's the actions. And, you know, what do they do, not just to organizationally make it a priority, but how do they become a champion at that level, you know, across the organization, and not make it the CISO's job to be the only one sort of trying to champion these things. But I would also say that because of everything that's going on right now in the world, not just from a threat perspective, but more importantly, from a customer assurance, and most companies now delivering a big part of whatever it is that they do via some sort of service, that this is just not something that you can ignore anymore, and that the CISO role has evolved into not just being about internally making sure this company is protected and we're minimizing risk, but that we're minimizing risk for our customers. And they trust us, right, with their important data or their important, work processes, et cetera. So I feel like as much as the right words were being said, that it became real when it was like customers were like, I'm not buying this until I talk to the CISO.
And look, I couldn't agree with you more. It's the big morphing, and I think one of the larger shifts for this function, this role, this concept in corporations, and it was a learning experience for a lot of executives that don't have a security background, is they would take the smartest security person in the room that they had and say, okay, now you're responsible. But those people didn't have business experience. And to what both Prasad and Julie were really talking about here is you need someone who understands business, who has really good communication skills, can see the threat landscape for what it is, and is not the typical office of the no executive. And there's many of us have been in that world where you've talked to the person and said, that's not acceptable. It used to be the old joke about lawyers. If corporate lawyers were, what do I have to do to make my weekend better? So if I have to say no, I say no. And for me, when I joined this organization, at my last organization, to Prasad, your point, my job was to root risk out. That's what I did. I rooted risk out. I still do that. Even in my new combined function, I root risk out. I like to present options. And it's back to the business because we are an enabling function. We're not a prevention function. There's a quote I love, which is prevention is dead, long live response, which relates exactly to what you said. I can't stop bad things from happening because unfortunately, and I think Prasad said phishing, people like to click the links. I don't know why. They love to click. We did an episode on this. They click stuff all the time and it makes us crazy. So what are you going to do about it? Because you're not going to stop them. If 60+% of people around the world like to click the links, what makes you so special that your culture is nobody clicks any link? Because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think too, also the role has evolved right along with the organization. When Al and I started working together in the early 2000s, security people were like monks. They were sort of holed off into corners of the organization, spoke language and used tablets that people didn't understand. Now it's a boardroom conversation, right? It's a critical part of business. And you talk about response, Matt. I know you've had many discussions with your board, just knowing you and being part of this show with you, how often you interact with the board. At the same time, Julie, your point about our businesses are accelerating the pace that they're gone digital and they're not going to slow down. They're just going to keep rapidly growing. Every interaction, all of that data, all those systems, customer information, trust with the customer, it is a central role. And it makes sense to combine it or make it part of a function that's enabling the delivery of so much of those goods, as opposed to an adjunct thing that's, it all depends on how the CISO and the CCIO work together, which isn't usually going to be good.
Well, and engineering, right? I mean, I think that's the one thing, right? Like we spent all these years talking about, the CIO CISO relationship, and was there the right partnership? Was there the right prioritization? That kind of stuff, because we know, it's one thing to architect it, it's something else to manage, maintain it, support it, deploy it. But the engineering relationship, I think, is where I probably have, learned the most in terms of, hey, it can't be a conversation about no, but it also can't always be a yes. And that's not just because of the risk you create for the organization, but it's also because of the compliance requirements we all now have against us, right? So for a long time in tech, right, it was more of we operate under, whatever NIST, whatever, but now you're actually being audited against those things. So there is this element and balance where we have to be there to solve problems. We have to be there to accelerate the business. We have to do what's right. But there are going to be some times where it's, look, we're going to have to rethink these things, if we want to continue to maintain some of these strict compliance. And one can argue whether all those checkboxes work or not. That's a separate price session or podcast, but it's the reality, right? It can't always be yes anymore either. So sorry, I went on for a while.
No, and okay. We should really dive into that, because I think it's going to tie to what Alan, you were talking about at the beginning and what we were talking about prior to doing the recording here. Where does this sit because of these complexities? But you tied to a very interesting point, because there's a massive culture shift. You are correct. In the past, if you wanted to do SDLC, right, and that was that buzzword, you'd put these gates in and you would go to the cyber person, whomever that was, and go, check it, checked, next, check, next. But you had said something pre-recording where, a lot of customers now are looking at you for those assurances. And how are you going to provide them if the person, Alan, to your point earlier, that is responsible for cybersecurity is so far down the stack or disconnected? I sit on a couple advisory boards, and it just rang a big bell where this company's CISO came on and talked about their org, and he said a couple of things where one of the other members of the advisory board said, well, let me get this straight. You have nothing to do with the development of the product we're here to talk about? He's like, no. And they said, then get off the call. Get us a cyber executive that's responsible for the security. And there was no one. And now you have a problem, right? So to your point.
Yeah, that's the whole aspect of places where they're looking at security as an afterthought, Matt. What you're bringing up is, I just need to kind of check the boxes, and there is no shortage of TLAs, the three-letter acronyms, right? The CISO's office is known for the biggest set of all the three-letter acronyms that we can imagine, right? And it's not about checking off those boxes. It's about how you integrate into the way work gets done, in the way product gets developed, in the way employees engage with the rest of the services, right? So, and I think that's where it's super critical, where it's not seen as an afterthought, but as part of the design of the various things that needs to happen. And that's where the CISOs need to get integrated with product development, get integrated with marketing as it comes to talking about your security posture with the external world, with HR in terms of the way you drive down compliance as a way of thinking for the employees, where the amount of time, because if you look at the weakest link in the chain, it's our employees, right? We can put the world's best tools. How do you stop an employee from going and clicking on that link and then exposing either a ransomware or a malware into the network, right? So they are the weakest link. So how do you get the CISO integrating with employees, integrating with engineering, with product, with marketing, so that now you're making a difference?
And that's why it's so hard. And one of the reasons we love having you two here is because it's a culture thing as well. If we're the office of no and people look at you as I think, Mitch, you said it, the monk, which I can tell you nobody's ever said that about me.
I didn't know you back then.
You don't go to that office because they say no, right? Don't go to them because they make things expensive or hard, instead of where we're starting to see that cultural shift of no, you have to go to that office, even if it's just for and I excuse the three-letter acronym, but the CYA, right? To cover yourself. But it's to make sure that we do things that don't expose our clients and our employees and our company to unnecessary risk. That's a culture shift. And it takes someone who has a lot of experiences like you both have, been around the block, have tried a lot of different things, know what it's like to be on both sides of that, to be able to help change that culture. I think it's a big deal. I mean,
it is. And in fact, I'm on the board of one company where not so much that there was some sort of cultural issue, but in fact, the CISO rolls up to the chief product officer, right? Because the fundamental of the business is the technology and the services that they deliver. And, when they kind of looked at, hey, how do we prioritize thinking security first as it relates to, right? Because they have devices as well as services, so you've got, hardware, you've got software, and it makes sense for them, right? Because so much of the conversation needs to be around that. And it doesn't mean that he's not teamed with the CIO to make sure that all the right security controls are in place as it relates to the corporate security side of things. But if you really look at where he's needing to spend most of his time and energy and really be embedded, it's on the product side. And so that really works well for them.
Al, I think it goes back to the conversation for really here is, where does a CISO sit? And we were having some fun again before the recording of, well, it can't sit here, it must sit here, it can't be there, it's got to be here. And Julie, I think that's the big question: is there one place the CISO should sit? And I'll just throw out and say no, and see if people disagree. But it's no, it depends on the organization, but it ties back to what you were just saying. And the root of it is, there's a culture. It's a good culture. The culture will decide where that function is needed the most and how high that function is in the organization.
Yeah, have the most influence too. I think that's, and impact results, right? The response.
Absolutely.
I've worked in environments where it has been part of the CIO, right? It's a combined CIO-CISO role. And I've been in situations where the CISO role is completely in a separate pillar, right? Mm-hmm. The advantage of kind of looking at a model where the CIO and CISO are in one seat is if you look at the role of the CIO influences everything that happens within the organization, right? The whole technology infrastructure, the application infrastructure, the analytics infrastructure, governance, risk, control, from an IT perspective. And if you look at the synergies between that and what you're looking at from a security perspective, keeping in mind that if it's a product organization, the CISO interacts a lot with engineering and product in influencing how product gets built and how product gets delivered in a high trust environment to our customers, because that's the information that we are protecting. The technology that the CISO is managing indirectly is the technology that the CIO is actually deploying, right? Be it the server farm or the end user computing devices or all the things, right? So bringing both of them together gives you that automatic synergy, right? Where sometimes it's the left side of my brain fighting with the right side of the brain saying, okay, how do I deal with this? Because it's now a conflict between the CISO side of my role and the CIO side of the role. But that's an interesting dynamic, Matt, right?
It only happens on days that end with Y with me, where you have to, right? It's a really rough balance, because you want speed of deployment, functionality, you want flash, it's very hard to go in front of an executive board or executive team to go, I just spent all this money on a thing you're never going to see, and it's going to prevent a thing that's never really happened here before, but could happen to that other group. I'm sorry, I couldn't get you that flashy workforce management system, or we didn't do an upgrade to the email systems, which would have added some new functionality to make everybody's life a little easier. It's a hard conversation. So Alan, if it's okay, I'd love to ask the question. So we're bantering on this. Has anybody on this panel experienced the concept of a BISO, Business Information Security Officer, that doesn't work directly for a CISO, but reports into business units, generally at very large corporations? I'm starting to see this where to your point, Prasad, you have that central security organization, central IT organization, but all your business units are sitting over here. And how do they tie into that? And we're starting to see, at least I'm starting to see in the market, a heavy push to get, we used to call them deputy CISOs, but BISOs that are really business aligned, have dotted lines into the office of the CISO or CSIO in our position, and are helping to bridge the gap between the business needs and the security needs, the audit and compliance needs, and even the client facing, I need the security person to come out and have a conversation. It can't be the firewall admin.
Great question, Matt. And I'm seeing more and more of that, right? Let me explain some of the things that we are doing, right? So we actually have, and we don't call them BISOs, we call them more the security champions, because the only way you can permeate a concept and do the organizational-wide change management is to have a set of trusted advisors within the various functions who know what you're trying to do and what you're really trying to accomplish, and then they become the spokespersons to kind of do the business change in each of the various product organizations. Example, we have somebody in the HR organization who does that. We have somebody in the finance organization who thinks about that, right? Now, when it comes to finance, it's the aspect there where it kind of crosses and doesn't cross, because SOX really doesn't come under the CISO's purview, but it comes under the CIO's purview, right? So which is where I'm using the SOX as a conversation starter to say, guys, don't just think about financial security and financial reporting and segregation of duties and all of that. Start thinking about security also. So that's the way we have tried to do it. We have not officially called it BISO, but I'm talking to a few candidates where, as I'm continuing to build out the team, and I do see the BISO role becoming more and more prevalent, especially in large product organizations, where for one product line you'll have a BISO and another BISO for another product line, all dotted line reporting into the CISO. But I see them as champions. Yeah.
It's a similar kind of concept like the office of the CTO, right? You'll typically have CTOs or whatever they call them in different parts of the organization. And then there's an office of the CTO that helps kind of bring it all together to try to get the economies of scale or directionally do things the same. It seems like a very natural evolution, Matt. I think maybe it's a healthy evolution for us.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue, I think it would definitely relate in some way to size of organization and industry and market that they're in. Okay, I mean, the organizations that I've worked in, both FireEye and Forescout, reasonably small in the bigger scheme of things. We felt like we were big, but we weren't that big. And so I guess where I tried to spend more time was not trying to, so clearly with the products organization, having security expertise and alignment and integration was really important. With the other organizations, what we tried to do was really talk more in terms of risk and compliance, right? Not security, but risk and compliance, right? And making sure that they sort of understood for their world what were the other risks that they needed to be thinking about, or what compliance elements were they responsible for making sure? So whether it was SOX as an SOX or whether it was SOC as an SOC, right? HR has a responsibility, facilities has a responsibility, right? And it was making sure that they absolutely understood what pieces of that they were ultimately responsible for making sure that there was policy and adherence to, because of the audit aspect. So I think we're all kind of touching on the same thing, whether it was somebody part-time job, full-time job, did it scale as the company scaled? Probably, but yeah, there's got to be way more than just a CISO and their team trying to make it all happen.
You know what, guys, though? So for me, this whole discussion is one that needs to be framed in context. And the context is that modern organizations are under, sort of are a planet where we have tectonic plates shifting all the time, right? When we look at the tectonic plate that is IT, that is information technology, look, 3 years ago, 50% of corporate executives still thought of it as a cost center, right? Their top priority for IT was cutting cost on it. How can I do IT cheaper? Because it's a cost center, right? So we think of IT, well, the IT people had it much better than the security people. They were more integrated. No, they were a cost center. They were, right? So that tectonic plate is shifting. IT is not a cost center, it's a profit generator. It makes our business, it's a business enabler. We can't do business without it. At the same time, maybe it was a smaller plate, but this plate of security, which had, at one time maybe was under the equator as pure InfoSec, but somehow shifted into the compliance and risk kind of mode, maybe it was an ice age, I don't know, but it's melted now and emerged to be more than compliance and risk. It's truly security, and it's butting up against this IT enabler plate, and mountains are rising out of it, right? And, I'm reminded of like the role of the CISO in Gene Kim's Phoenix Project, right?
John.
Where, yes, exactly. And, what a poor SOB that was. But, that guy's gone. That guy has given way to the Prasad and to the Julie and the Mitchell and Matt of today, right? Because we live in this new map, this new earth, this new formulation of what IT is, what security is, how it all relates to the broader business. Because at the same time, those plates were shifting. So were people, right? We don't talk about HR anymore. We talk about people, right? It's about people. And we talk about the role of the board, and the executive has changed. We live on a very volcanic world here.
Well, that explains all the heat, steam, and lava. Yeah.
Yeah. It does. Look, we should. Yeah, I was going to start singing my Lava Girl thing from Hawaii, but anyway. But we shouldn't forget this, that we live in an ever-changing kind of world, and all of these pieces somehow fit into each other, right? And so I think that's what drives a lot of what we're seeing here today.
When I think it goes back to this earlier conversation about, hey, organizationally, who cares? Right?
You're right.
I mean, like, if everybody understands that we must make this a priority, it must be embedded in the way we think, the way we build, the way we deploy, all these kind of things. To your point about, hey, it's about people, right? And quite frankly, it's about take the agendas away and just be like, hey, what do we need to do for this organization? And what do we need to do for our customers? And that needs to be more and more the dialogue, right? Because it's changing all the time.
It's a cultural. I mean, this is about the culture.
It really is cultural.
Yeah, I agree. And if you have a scenario where security, cyber, physical, doesn't matter, innovation, all of those kinds of things are baked in, to your point, I agree. It doesn't really matter. The only time I've seen where it can matter, where that function is located, is career paths and finding the right individual.
And let's be honest, it matters in some way, right? You have to have an org structure. I'm not trying to be so like none of it matters, everybody just works for themselves type thing. I totally agree with you. But I think sometimes there's a little too much energy on, hey, should this be in engineering? Should it be in, and then you're really kind of like, do we all agree this is really important? And that we're going to start bringing security in much earlier in the architecture and design elements of what we're doing as a company. If we can all agree on that, I really don't care. Take it, have it report to you. I'm good.
That was the reason I started DevOps.com, Julie, because that was my vision, that I don't care. As long as, if we could get security further left, more involved, more integrated, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And, but we also, I didn't envision then the world now. Right. Or maybe I did, but I didn't think it would happen this quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at the going back to the geological references to what you were saying, right? We are experiencing a seismic shift in terms of companies moving away from traditional big tools on-prem to now everybody's SaaS and cloud, right? Thanks to the pandemic, people may have had a 4 or 5 year roadmap. It all happened in 1 year, and they pretty much had to do what they had to do to keep the business running, right? So technology is also adding a dimension in terms of org design and in terms of the operational model, right? Because the tools which would have normally worked in an on-prem type of an environment don't necessarily work in an all SaaS or an all cloud type of an environment, which means the role of the modern CIO and the CISO has also emerged to now be able to handle what is being the cards that have been dealt to them, right? Which is basically now a completely SaaS-based environment where you now are relying not just on what you bring to the table, but now are relying and putting the onus on another vendor who's a SaaS vendor to provide and cover your bacon, right? So it is basically it's all about risk arbitrage, right? Which is the risk that you want to absorb. So that's also having a determination on the organizational structure and where the role fits in to handle this new dynamic that we are experiencing.
But actually, so real quick on top of that, because I agree, but it also changes, again, I think to the point that we're coming to here is it doesn't really matter as long as whomever that function reports to believes. They have to believe in cyber. It can't be the afterthought. It can't be the, you're over there, leave me alone, I'm focused over here. As long as that doesn't happen, I agree. But to your point, it also changes the entire corporate conversation because the move to home, and we've had episodes on this, it changes, well, where's privacy now? Where's compliance? Where's ethics? What can a CISO do? It was very easy for the cyber exec and all of us. When you came into the office, that's my machine. I'll do whatever we want. I will monitor. We can see your well, now that machine's sitting in a home. Did you put the proper controls? Are we able to look at that machine when it's in a home? How are you doing remote? I mean, these other things start coming out, which is, again, why it's culture. To be able to figure out what can I do, because country A and country B could have very different laws that people in the typical CISO, CIO functions, we're not lawyers, never have been lawyers. I've never studied law, and I've never stayed at a Holiday Inn Express to say I was a lawyer for a weekend, right? It's not my forte. And if I fight with my legal team, or I don't have an alliance, cultural alliance with my legal team, I could expose the corporation to risk, even though I'm the one that's supposed to be rooting risk out.
You know, I guess COVID is the asteroid that hit our planet we're talking about. But what I was thinking about, Matt, is that some people place importance based on the level in the organization. We've kind of gone through that transition with security, but getting elevated to a point where it's conversations with the board, it's at a C level or something close to that. I'm not sure if it doesn't matter where it reports as much as it's really about integrating security across the business. So, Julie, your point of it makes most sense to be here. It makes most sense to be in product or engineering or wherever it is, because so much that touches so much more in the organization.
And it's the risk where the risk is biggest to the company.
Good point. Good point. So I'm not sure if I'm disagreeing with you, Matt, as much as thinking about, it can report anywhere because it matters most. Where's it going to be most effective?
So we've been touching around a subject then, and I think one of the interesting questions to ask then is, okay, and let's just go with Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000, right? Because it's going to be different on non-public companies to public companies, the fortunes than the non-fortunes. But who should be helping to make those decisions of where it should sit? Shouldn't be the CIO, it shouldn't be the CISO. So who makes the decision? Is it the board? Is it the CEO? And depending on the answer to that question, there may not be one answer. It could be it depends. But then how do we help educate them as practitioners so that they can make the decision? Or is that a stupid question?
No, it's not a stupid question, Matt. If you look at overall the responsibility of the board, right? The board has, apart from one guiding the company through the various phases of the evolution of the company, they actually provide the independence which public markets are looking for, right? From a role and responsibility of the board to make sure that the company has got a good, solid risk management posture, right? Because people don't just look at the leadership team. When people are working with companies, they look at who's the board behind this, because they're looking for that independence. They're looking for that oversight, right? So I would say the board has a huge role to play in terms of the design of where this belongs. And internally within the organization, it could be in any of the verticals like we have talked about, right? But at the end of the day, the CISO role is accountable to the board, because they need to have that open, honest, intellectually honest conversation. They need to be transparent to the board to be able to have give the board the comfort level that the company is managing to the risks that the company is exposed to, right? So I would say the board has a big role to play, after which the actual design of where it is organizationally would be with the C-suite leadership, right?
I totally agree with you. I think the board's job is to make sure that there is clarity around what is the risk posture. Are we measuring the right risks? Are we comfortable? Organizationally, they've got to have a management team in place that can make the right decisions as it relates to that. Of course, the CISO needs to feel comfortable that they can, direct line to, the board as necessary, or to the enterprise risk committee, or wherever they report up into, that they feel like they have a voice as well if they're not seeing what they think they need. But, it's so much of this is about, does the company understand what the non-financial risks are? And what are they doing about it?
Well, here's the Achilles heel to this. What makes you think the board understands what the hell the CISO's talking about, or what we're talking about, right? One of the trends I'm seeing is that boards now, public company boards, large enterprise boards, are looking for board members with cyber experience, because someone there has to, at least if I'm going to have a committee around risk and financial risk, as you say, Julie, I got to have someone to lead that committee who knows what the heck I'm talking, knows what it is. So, when we say, we throw it on the board, like the board is this magical kind of thing. We need board members who get this. And without it, if the CISO falls in the forest, but there's no board members who understand it, did he really or she really fall, right? and so, this is, I think, going to be the next area when we talk about beyond the expanding role of the CISO, is how do we get our boards up to speed? Our boards aren't configured correctly to interpret and handle what our executives, our C-levels are giving them.
Yep.
My 2 cents.
Excellent point, Alan. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think I wouldn't be on 2 boards if it wasn't for those boards recognizing we don't have anyone on this that really can help us manage these things, and they're learning along the way. But also sometimes I think not knowing too much isn't a bad thing as well, as long as you're asking the right questions.
Yep, it's asking the right questions, and to your point that you have someone to talk to so that you can understand what a good answer sounds like. It's funny when I'm giving private consultations and having these conversations. A lot of people are like, "What 10 questions should I ask?" I'm like, "Well, that's not the big question. It's what 10 answers should you expect from." Yeah. That's the bigger thing, because if you ask me a question and I tell you 42, do you know if that?
Jackie Robinson.
Yeah. So if you look at a parallel of, I know I'm going to quote more of a financial construct here, right? Boards before 2003 knew nothing about SOX, right? When SOX came out, boards then started understanding what the impact of financial compliance and making sure that you're now able to get a good set of numbers which are more predictable and accurate, right? So that's what SOX 302 and 404 determined. Board members learned that, and that was the birth of what we call the audit committee, right? Where they now are monitoring what the CFO is saying and monitoring what the internal controls are. We'll see emergence of that, especially now with technology shifting, right? We are saying, like to Julie's point, right now, Julie's part of a few of the boards, right? And I'm advising a few companies. You'll see now the desire for the leadership team within companies to bring industry experts into their board, who are now able to have a seat at the table to determine what security strategy needs to be, and are able to ask the right questions and know what the right answers are as well, right?
And have a business background, right?
And have a business background.
The role of the CISO has changed so much. If you were a firewall admin last year, and I'm not knocking firewall administration, right?
There's not enough of them. They're hard to hire.
They are massively hard to hire. But if you're expecting that person to go from being very technical to being very business public speaking, that's a
different person. Yeah.
And we have a long road, because there are also not a lot of business level CISOs in the market these days, which is why we always have the 3 letters joke when it comes to CISOs. And I won't bore everybody with that joke now, but a lot of people know what I'm talking about. So,
we're working on something about that here at MediaOps. We'll talk about. Guys, I got to pull the plug on us, though. I'm sorry, we're overtime. And it's not like we're the Bill Maher show and we could go on YouTube for, overtime. But we will be back in 2 more weeks with another great CISO talk. But for now, Prasad Ramakrishnan, Julie Cullivan, thank you for joining us. And this was a great discussion. We'll run it back and continue this. We'll get Jody, our associate producer, to make it happen. Mitchell, Matthew, as always, thank you for sitting in and adding to this so much to the discussion. This is Alan Schimmel. Oh, it's our pleasure. Come back again, please. This is Alan Schimmel from MediaOps and CISO Talk. We hope you enjoyed this. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another great CISO Talk. But until then, be safe and be well. Take care.
CISO Talk. To hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, next up we have our Something Old segment. It's from the recent Predict 2021 Virtual Summit. It features Eva Velasquez and James Lee from the Identity Resource Theft Center and James Rotolo from Grant Thornton LLP. They talk about cyber criminals relying on poor consumer behavior to fuel identity crime and business attacks. Taking a lot of statistics from the ITRC's Aftermath survey. Great conversation that the 3 of them have, very illuminating as well. So let's give this one a listen.
Thank you for joining us for this presentation as part of the Predict 2021 Virtual Summit. I'm Eva Velasquez, the President and CEO of the Identity Theft Resource Center, and I'm joined by an esteemed member of our board and an identity fraud expert, James Russo of Grant Thornton. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Eva.
And also our COO, another James Lee, an expert in cybersecurity and privacy issues. And in order to avoid confusion, I'm going to get a little bit formal, and I will be calling on you both by your last names. So we'll be very professional and formal today. We're going to explore our predictions for 2021 based on the trends we see and the analysis of the data that we collect. Based on this, we believe that identity criminals are changing their tactics, and that consumer actions, not just their personal information, will be the fuel for identity crimes and fraud in 2021 and in future years. But first, before we discuss those predictions, just some quick background on the Identity Theft Resource Center. This is our mission. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that provides no-cost recovery services to victims, education and risk minimization techniques to the public, and we've been collecting detailed information about publicly reported data breaches in the US since 2005. It's this experience that we have in this space that we've based our predictions on. Next slide, please. So our 4 predictions: cyber criminals are relying less on consumers' personal information and more on consumers' behaviors to commit identity-related crimes. Secondly, re-victimization rates for identity crimes and compromises are rising. Pandemic-related identity crimes will impact victims well into 2021 and beyond. Third, privacy and cybersecurity and identity laws will continue to merge into a more holistic set of public policies, at least at the state level. And lastly, some U.S. government resources dedicated to financial and identity crime victims have been all but eliminated, and options for direct assistance will continue to decline in 2021. Next slide, please. Let's get started unpacking this. Prediction number 1, cyber criminals are relying less on consumers' personal information. Mr. Lee, that doesn't sound like conventional wisdom. Please explain.
No, it doesn't. If you go back and you look at the data that we've seen, so you referenced data breach trends, for example. If you go back as far as 2016, we were at an all-time high, but ever since then, things have been declining in the sense of the number of data breaches and the number of individuals impacted. Now, there have been some anomalies along the way because you might have a really, really large data breach that impacted a lot of people. But generally speaking, we've seen a steady decline. And why is that? The main thing we've seen is an increase that offsets the number of consumers impacted is you're beginning to see more businesses impacted. Ransomware, which people are familiar with at this point, and highly targeted phishing kinds of schemes, generally referred to, if it's directed at a business, as business email compromise. So those have really taken off. And we're going to release our 2020 data breach information about a week from now. And you'll be able to see that those, both the number of individuals impacted, the number of data breaches have dropped, but you're going to see those cyber attacks, those ransomware attacks, those business email compromises and other kind of phishing ramping up. And we'll also talk about why that is, because it doesn't mean people get to just kind of, relax. It just means things are different. The bad guys, they're a crafty lot, and they figured out new techniques of how to separate people from the resources.
And we'll dig a little bit into that relax and don't worry about risk in just a second. But Mr. Ruotolo, how does that compare to what you've seen? What are you seeing in the identity fraud space?
Yeah, Eva, it's very interesting. I agree with a lot of what James Lee just shared with us, right? So from a fraud actor's perspective, the value of a hack or of a data breach is not necessarily how many people are victimized. Right. So we tend to see that in the media. We read a lot about, how many hundreds of, thousands of people are impacted by data breaches. But it's from a fraud actor standpoint, it's really about how quickly and how easily they can monetize that stolen information and how deep
the information is on any given individual. So it makes sense that we've seen breaches kind of decreasing overall, and yet fraud is not actually going down, right? So that the fraud rates are up. They don't necessarily need to do these large-scale data breaches in order to commit those types of frauds. And so I think last year we may have seen even like a 30% reduction in the number of breaches, right? Which sounds like a tremendous decrease, and that's a good thing, of course. But the reality is that while they are crafty, they're also pretty lazy and like to take the path of least resistance, right? So, and like any good business, they like a strong return on their investment. So they're looking at things like business email compromise and ransomware that frankly are easier to perpetrate and they pay out, right? They've been making lots of money at these types of scams. So I'm seeing the same thing with the clients that I work with, an uptick in business email compromise. One flavor of that that's been expanding most recently is to leverage third-party relationships. So it's not just impersonating your CEO or your CFO and trying to convince somebody to transfer funds. Increasingly, they're impersonating the vendors and contractors that your company works with and exploiting those trusted relationships and the fact that you know who they are and believe that you're communicating with a legitimate partner. So as we think about kind of traditional business email compromise and phishing scams, it's not limited to just the people within your organization who might be spoofed. It's actually anybody in your sphere of influence, right, that they're taking advantage of those relationships. So that maps exactly to what James Lee just mentioned.
Well, and that dovetails really nicely into the next conversation point on this. The perception that consumers may have that their risk is going down. Do you think that's going to lead to complacency if they actually believe that? The 30% reduction is huge, but it doesn't mean that the risk has been reduced significantly, not really. So let's throw that back. Mr. Rotolo, have you comment, and then James, you can follow up.
Yeah, I mean, my quick answer to that is consumers in general don't really have a lot of control over the data breaches that are occurring, on their data, because in many cases, those breaches are happening with organizations that control that information that they've done business with a long time ago, or their credit bureaus, or they're one step removed. So the consumers didn't really have any control over those types of hacks before, and they still don't. So while the volumes of those types of attacks may change, really in terms of the fraud risk, there's not a whole lot that's different now, even though those metrics sound like a significant shift.
Right. Mr. Lee?
Yeah, I echo that. I mean, there is that risk because there is sort of the impression that people have of who a hacker is and how they do things, and we've trained people fairly well to do certain kinds of things to protect themselves, but the hackers or threat actors, as they prefer to be called today, somehow hacker has become a pejorative. These people are highly professional today. These are not kids sitting in their parents' basements anymore. They're highly sophisticated, highly complex business organizations that operate just like a legitimate business. They have margins. They have revenue goals. They have call centers. They have help desks.
They have customer service.
Yeah, they really do. They make charitable contributions. I mean, if you can believe that. So the level of sophistication is also feeding into what we're seeing now. And as James also said, is they're going to take the path of least resistance. Why would you try to attack 1 million people for $300 each, which is generally the amount that, according to some statistics, that a person gets if they hack an individual? Why would you try to get hack 1 million people when you can hack one business one time and get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars? So there is that risk of complacency. What we really need to be talking about is how do we get people to think about threats differently? Mm-hmm. So the threat is not diminished, the threat is different. And how you react is different.
Well, and we could talk about this forever. We could do an entire webinar on this, but we have to move on. We have another prediction to talk about. So if you could, next slide, please. And this is that re-victimization rates for identity crimes and compromises. They are rising. And pandemic-related identity crimes will impact victims well into the future, not just 2021, well into the future. We saw, all of us, we saw incredible amounts of identity-related fraud, and we saw victims having their credentials and their identities used in multiple attempts across many different silos. So I'd love to know what you think the long-term impacts of that behavior is. And we'll start with Mr. Rutolo, and then James, you can comment on the back of that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we were seeing an increase in identity-related frauds well before the COVID pandemic hit. And, after it hit, obviously that trend continued. And the stimulus funds that were made available by government agencies were really just fuel on the fire, right? So that's more money that's up for grabs. And so, we saw unemployment fraud, identity scams. We've seen, business PPP loan scams that are related to identity theft and related types of frauds. So I think it's really a huge challenge. And what we're going to see this year, I believe, is that a lot of folks are going to encounter tax refund fraud when they go to file their taxes with the IRS this year, because that essentially is the same type of scam, right? Stealing someone's identity, filing as if I were them, and then getting their refund check sent to me instead. And so when a legitimate person goes to file their taxes, they'll discover that, that's already been processed. And wait a second, right? I didn't realize I did that. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're going to definitely see a new wave of fraud associated with the new round of stimulus funds that are coming out, right? So we're going to see those methods that were used the last time around, but perfected, right? They've had time to figure out how it works. Certainly, I can applaud the government for introducing some new controls to try to prevent fraudulent activity with those programs. But at the end of the day, the bad guys have got this figured out. They have good intelligence sharing networks like we were just talking about. They're going to go at that hard again. So I think we're going to see a whole nother wave of consumers that are impacted by these types of identity crimes.
Yeah, and I don't think Mr. Lee disagrees with you on that one.
I do not.
Did you want to have any comment on that one, or you want me to move on to the next question?
Why don't you move on? Because I can work in any answer I might have into the second question.
Well, we at the ITRC, this is something that we've looked at. In fact, we have our own data that supports this trend of re-victimization rates. So what does the analysis of our data show there?
Well, what it shows is increasingly you're seeing people who are victimized a second time, sometimes a third time, even before they have resolved the first identity crime. So part of that is driven by, as we've talked about, this idea of identity-related fraud that is increasing. It's not just data being stolen in a data breach, it's using that data. And that's what has fueled a lot of this fraud we've seen from a stimulus perspective too, is there's so much information available. They don't need to steal anymore, they've got it. Now they're using it, the bad guys, that is. And so we're going to see that play out, for quite a while. And the other thing that the pandemic has shown, even though certain parts of government have adopted some very good identity verification practices, we've also seen that we have some very poor identity verification practices. And a lot of those actually facilitated the fraud that we're now seeing. The states in particular have a long way to go to be able to make sure that the benefits that they are providing are actually going to the people who need them and to the actual person who has applied. A lot of the fraud we've seen, an estimate by the Department of Labor is $26 billion in just unemployment fraud from the first round of the unemployment benefits. Yeah, that level of fraud is because we didn't have good verification systems, and people who were allowed to apply, even if they weren't unemployed, and sometimes it might have been an individual who was actually the person, but most of the time it was somebody pretending to be somebody else using fraudulent data that they had obtained elsewhere. So we're going to be with this for a while, and we do need to pay a lot more attention to how we verify that I am who I say I am.
Well, and just to bring it home as far as re-victimization, we have to remember that at the state level, an individual can be victimized multiple times. Those systems do not interface with each other. And so they may have discovered that someone fraudulently applied for benefits in the state in which they actually reside, but those applications could have gone in through multiple states, and they're not going to discover that until much later. To James Rutola's point, when they go to file their taxes and they have income that was sent to the IRS, they had no idea was even coming down the pipeline for them because they never received those benefits. It's another fraud issue that they have to unwind. And on that note, the Federal Trade Commission is showing nearly 46,000 cases of ID fraud that's related to the pandemic. And as you said before, these kind of crimes that they're very hard to detect and even harder for an individual consumer to prevent. What can they do? What can an individual do? James Lee, I'll start with you, and then James R., you can follow up.
Well, there are certainly some very basic things that people can do that will be helpful. Starting with, make sure you only have one password per account. We all have dozens, if not in some cases, hundreds of accounts. Each one of those comes with a password. I know it's a pain, but you have to have a different password for every one of those. And there are different tools you can use to help manage that. But that's one of the ways the bad guys are able to take advantage of people, is because they know people reuse passwords. So once they get that login credential one time, they have technologies that allow them to hit 500 accounts a second using those fraudulent or using the legitimate passwords and logins, trying to fraudulently enter accounts. So one password per account. Use a password manager if you need it. Two-factor authentication, using a second form of verification to make sure that that is you. And it's the best use is to actually have an app on your phone. Don't use the text, the code to you unless you absolutely have to. But that's a great way too. Those things together will go a long way to ensuring that accounts you have are secure and stay secure. The other thing I would add is, if you haven't set up certain kinds of accounts, you need to. If you don't have an online banking account, set it up. Why? Because the bad guys have the information needed to do it in your name, and they may beat you to the punch. So, set up accounts that are important to you and maintain those in a way that remains secure, like the password tips we just talked about.
And please don't make the password.
No, 12 characters or longer. A 12-character password, even if it's just basic uppercase and lowercase, that's 300 years it takes one of those automated tools to crack. So longer is better, and use a quote. You don't have to use the up and down.
A phrase.
Yeah. Use a phrase. Use a song lyric, a book title.
I fully recommend the cyber hygiene practices that James Lee just recommended. The only other things I would add are things like, pay attention to the communications you get. So if you receive a letter or an email and you weren't expecting something, don't just assume that it's an error or throw it away and delete it. Get in touch with your institution. So if you have a question about a message from your bank, for example, the best thing, if you have a credit card, turn over the card and call the 800 number on the back. Or go to your browser, open it up, go to your bank's website and click on the Contact Us link and call them at their toll-free number. You don't need to click on the links in the email. You don't need to call the numbers that they give you in the email. If your institution has an issue they'd like to address with you, they'll have the information when you call. And so, those are some things that, that you can do to try to reduce your risk related to some of these phishing scams. The other is just remember to monitor your credit. Pay attention to people that may be opening accounts in your name, and remember to run those same reports on the Social Security numbers for your children. Children's socials are often used for synthetic identity crimes. And since they don't normally have financial accounts when they're very young, people often forget to keep tabs on those. So set up a credit freeze if that's necessary, and take some of those steps in working with the credit bureaus to try to protect your accounts.
Those were all great points. You guys get a gold star. It's almost like you're professionals in this space or something. Let's move on. Next slide, please. Prediction number 3, privacy, cybersecurity, and identity laws will continue to merge into a more holistic set of public policies, at least at the state level. James Lee, we have been talking about this. It feels like forever. So what is this? Let's distill it down. What does it mean, and why do you think it's happening?
Yeah, we have been talking about this forever, at least for 15 years. Why this is happening now? So to back up for a second, we have always operated under basically 3 different systems at both the state and the federal government level of laws governing these kind of things we've been talking about: data breaches, cyber attacks, misuse of your identity. They've always been in 3 silos. What we have seen, though, starting in 2017, 2018, is bringing all of those 3 areas under one legal umbrella or one regulatory umbrella. Why? Because people finally realize they're interrelated. You can't have privacy without security. You can't have privacy and security without identity management. So all of these things are interrelated. So we're now beginning to see at the state level, because the federal government is a little different. It operates under different dynamics. States can move much faster. So you are beginning to see states do just that. They are taking these 3 silos, bringing them under one comprehensive law where all 3 areas of both protection, detection, and enforcement all together. It started actually in New York State. Then California passed a specific law, and now the voters of California passed a new law just last November that's called the California Privacy Rights Act, which is the strongest privacy law in the country and looks very much like some of the laws you see in Europe. So that's what's happening, and that's why it's happening.
Well, Mr. Rotolo, do you think this consolidation is helpful for consumers and businesses, or less so?
Well, for consumers, I would say definitely. I think that, the laws are finally starting to address some of the major gaps that have been created, especially with the advancements in technology. I don't suspect that regulations will always keep pace with the advancements that are yet to come, because we're typically not good at doing that quickly. But they're definitely moving in the right direction. And I love the fact that these types of new legislation give consumers more control over their own information, which really is powerful. So I think the answer is yes. For businesses, I think my answer is slightly different. It's a yes, but is the answer. So consolidation, of course, is good. That streamlines operations, makes things a little easier. But the reality is that organizations operating at the national or global level are still going to have a patchwork of changing regulations that they need to adhere to. I think a lot of them are looking at laws like the ones in California that are the most stringent and sort of using those as the model so that they will effectively comply with the others. But all of those types of changes also come with a cost. And unfortunately, that may be a cost that also trickles back down to the consumer. And so there's certainly some pros and cons here. I think directionally, we're moving the right way and making the right improvements, yet to see kind of how that actually is executed and how it manifests itself.
And Mr. Lee, anything to add before we move on to the last prediction?
No, I think you'll see this kind of move across the country. We've talked about California, but there are a number of states lining up to do the same thing. We would have seen this last year, but for the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see if those begin to advance now that in every state there's a new legislative year. It's starting right now. So I do think we'll see more states on this bandwagon, and businesses will be given a couple of years to get ready to comply. In California, you have until 2023. So I do think it's coming. I think we'll see more of it at the state level. And eventually, just like we did with breach notices, it took almost a decade, more than a decade actually, to get every state to have a breach notice law. I think we'll have state privacy laws, sometime universally in the next decade.
Next slide, please. Moving on to the last prediction. And this is one that I'm going to take because it's particularly troubling to me. The options for direct assistance for folks are going to decline. They're going to continue to decline. And I'm deeply concerned that we will be left with only paid options for recovery services. This notion that only high net worth individuals or people with assets or targets, it's just it's just flat out wrong. The thieves don't actually care about your true financial status. They're going to leverage your credentials in any way that they can, regardless of whether or not you have the disposable income to, pay for a service or hire an attorney to help you unwind the damage. And just so people understand, the dollars that are made available to victim service providers through the Victims of Crime Act are dwindling at a remarkable rate. And by the way, these are not taxpayer dollars. This is a fund that was established to assist crime victims, and it's funded by things like fines and penalties and disgorging of ill-gotten gains and profits from companies and individuals that have broken the law. And it's always been terribly challenging for those of us in the space. I know both of you can attest to this, to get decision makers to understand that the folks who are impacted by these kinds of crimes, this is a crime, and this can have devastating impacts for people. So we need more resources for people for these crimes. As an example, this fund released $2.3 billion in grants to help crime victims in the fiscal year 2019. Last year, it was reduced to $1.8 billion. That may sound like a lot of money, but we're talking about all the crimes that are occurring across the United States in a given year. And it's not just about the financial losses for this particular population. As you guys know, identity theft can affect a person's ability to secure employment, secure housing, even pursue higher education. And if that's not enough to convince you as to why this is a very troubling prediction, our last survey, post-victimization survey, where we talked to the people that we helped in a previous year, had a record 10% of victims surveyed reporting that they felt suicidal while they were going through this process and dealing with it. So I'll say it again, we need more resources for identity, cybercrime, scams and fraud victims, not less. Next slide. That is us sort of winding this up and wrapping it up. Thank you, James Lee and James Rotolo, for joining the conversation.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening today. If you have any questions, you want to learn more about how to get involved in this space or learn more about the Identity Theft Resource Center, please visit our website at idtheftcenter.org.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines for you. First up on DevOps.com is an article that looks at how organizations can respond to rising cloud costs. We've taken a look at the very expensive issue of cloud spend a few times before, from over-provisioning resources to subscriptions for SaaS tools, but it's a topic worth addressing again and again, as the problem just doesn't seem to be going away. Part of the issue is plain and simple visibility into cloud spending, since so many organizations don't even know how much they should be spending, not to mention how much they are currently spending. But beyond that, IT departments also need ways to optimize their cloud resources so they don't fall into the over-provisioning trap. And of course, they need to be responsible and accountable for the amount of money they're spending. It's easy to make the purchase when it's going on the corporate credit card, without any measurable ROI or conversations with stakeholders. This article takes a look at these and other things that organizations need to consider when it comes to cloud spending, and introduces the role of the cloud economist as another possible solution to stemming the money flow associated with cloud usage. Speaking of cloud, we also have an article on some of the ways organizations are getting it wrong when they use the public cloud. Yes, the cloud has been transformational for so many. However, it's not an easy task to migrate on-premises applications into a public cloud environment. Modern applications are rarely self-contained entities, and application dependencies occur when software components, applications, and servers rely on one another to deliver a service. In an average enterprise, application dependencies can number in the thousands. If an application is migrated to the public cloud without understanding the dependent services, severe performance degradation can occur with applications that are still on premises. In short, they don't take a know-before-you-go approach to cloud migration. This article details some of the potential pitfalls for organizations in adopting public cloud services and ways in which they can be better prepared before they hit the start button on their cloud migration. Over on Container Journal, we have an article that offers up some leadership best practices when implementing DevOps with Kubernetes. In the second article in a series, Mark Hornbeek looks at why leadership is so important when it comes to engineering DevOps with Kubernetes. IT leaders need to update their own skills and practices to successfully lead transformations with Kubernetes, and leadership practices can impact the performance of DevOps engineered with Kubernetes. Leaders need to know how to establish and manage actions for strategies, goals, operations policies, and evolution roadmaps. This article goes into detail the importance of leadership in engineering DevOps with Kubernetes, its impact leadership can have on performance, and the steps leaders can take to engineer DevOps with Kubernetes. For organizations that are adopting containers and Kubernetes, this is a great article that goes beyond the technology and into what some might term the softer skills that can make or break a DevOps implementation. And speaking of Kubernetes, we also have an article about the 3 Kubernetes storage pet peeves. This is a first-person practitioner perspective on using Kubernetes and discovering early on that simplicity and storage are polar opposites in Kubernetes environments, especially when running stateful workloads. What is an advantage in Kubernetes? Ephemerality is a big no-no in storage. And YAML, well, let's not get started with YAML. This article is highly entertaining and illuminating in helping us understand why Kubernetes storage can be so effing difficult, despite the fact that so many organizations move to Kubernetes to reduce complexity. And it offers a potential solution, which you'll have to read the article to get. All right, over on Security Boulevard is a look at the increased risks associated with using social media in 2021. Since the start of the pandemic, many of us turned to social media platforms to stay connected to the outside world. But events and issues throughout the last year, some related to the pandemic, some not, have shown us that social media is not reflective of reality. But according to a recent social media report from McAfee, more than half of respondents to a survey plan to continue using the digital life tools they've adopted post-pandemic. And that brings up a whole host of security concerns. 68% were concerned that their personal information, such as birth dates or addresses, could get hacked. And 1 in 3 respondents admitted they were not confident in their ability to prevent a cyber attack. For cybersecurity professionals, the issues of social media account takeovers and data theft prove difficult to address. The typical IT staffer has little control over what a user does on social media, especially if the user is on their own device. Solving those security problems comes down to a dose of awareness and, perhaps, a dose of policy. And finally, we have an article that looks at the importance of identity and automation in the cybersecurity space. 2020 was a year of accelerated digital transformation with the COVID-19 related lockdowns, pushing pre-existing trends into overdrive. We saw more cloud adoption, remote work, and digital transformation in a single year than we'd seen in the previous decade. But of course, a near-perfect storm in the enterprise security world, threat actors have dramatically expanded their hunting grounds, from fortified network perimeters to the unprotected home networks and unsecured private devices used to access an organization's assets and resources. There is a common thread connecting the most pressing cybersecurity challenges, according to the article. The most urgent, painful, and noticeable obstacles can be traced back to identity management and authentication. Passwordless authentication is one possible solution. Without the inherent weaknesses and vulnerabilities associated with passwords and weak login password combinations, the dangers of credential dumps and endemic password reuse are no longer a problem. By removing the dependency on login combinations that can be lost, reused, stolen, or forgotten, organizations can improve security, lower the overall total cost of ownership, and improve employee experience all at the same time. All right, that's it for today's headlines. Please check back with us on Thursday when I will have a fresh new batch for you. Until then, have a great day. Stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Luke Tenery, who is a partner at a company called Stone Turn, which is a global advisory firm that specializes in regulatory risk and compliance issues, investigations, and business disputes. Luke, sounds like you guys have your hands full over there.
Indeed, times are busy and constant change, which we like and especially enjoy helping clients navigate through uncharted waters.
Yeah, well, I can imagine you've had a lot going on in the last 10 months or so, and the pandemic notwithstanding, even the previous 4 years have, I'm sure, presented their share of opportunities, I guess, for you guys, but definite issues in the regulatory compliance space. So I know that we're going to have a conversation about what we can kind of expect with the new administration coming in, presidential administration. But I'd first kind of like to get from you, if you will, kind of a lay of the lay of the land from a regulatory and compliance perspective. Where do you think we are kind of as a whole when it comes to compliance and meeting the needs of organizations meeting the needs of their end users and their customers when it comes to issues surrounding data privacy and personal information and just meeting compliance? How are we doing kind of on that spectrum?
It's an interesting question. I think having been in the industry for a number of years, we've seen quite a bit of evolution really over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years. We've seen really the United States has taken a little bit of a different track compared to other areas of the world in terms of how states have driven some of their state-to-state requirements somewhat differently in many cases in terms of how states or governments, local governments manage and work to protect the privacy of their constituents. So as an example, California has probably been one of the most forward in enforcing, at least forward enforcing in terms of asking businesses, organizations within its state to have a very high bar of protections to protect their citizens. Federally, there has been discussion, especially in an increased rate over the last few years, in terms of, is the U.S. going to take sort of a more centralized bent or forward leaning posture to, in particular, protect consumers' information from a privacy perspective.
Yeah.
But they've obviously got their hands full in a variety of other issues that kind of stem outside of just compliance and privacy from a consumer protection with, more recent events, around SolarWinds and those sorts of things.
Yeah. So, one of the things that's always been kind of, I guess, a sticking issue is the argument of whether compliance and cybersecurity in general is it a state issue or is it a federal issue? And when it comes to mandating what organizations need to do to protect their customers' privacies and the data involved, and I wonder if you think with this new administration, do you think that we're going to be maybe revisiting that argument, or do you think that there will be kind of other avenues that this administration will take when it comes to compliance and cybersecurity? Are there kind of something in the winds of change, if you will? I mean, what do you guys see on the landscape?
Sure, I definitely think there's a resurgence of both investment and priority, which I think is one, a good sign, but two, I don't know that this administration has any choice but to prioritize it. Mm-hmm. With the moves that I've seen them making, particularly in the last really 2 months, particularly with SolarWinds, it's not uncommon, like a private organization that's been compromised or had a significant security issue, increased presence by people with NSA experience, ramp up of spending to the technology and cyber apparatus directly in the executive branch or around the White House. This is an administration that definitely knows it's important, realizes or recognizes that there's been a pretty significant element of compromise, particularly with SolarWinds. Mm-hmm. And it's an administration looking to increase its visibility into the overall, I think, cybersecurity apparatus, both from a government perspective, but then more broadly also from a critical infrastructure standpoint, because as you well probably know, Charlene, our critical infrastructure is not just government, it stems over into the private sector. And so I think there's a recognition of that right now.
Yeah, and now we just have news of a potential attack on a Florida water supply right around the Super Bowl up in Tampa Bay, I think it was, and so we're talking about these critical infrastructure attacks that potentially could be life-threatening to certain citizens, and so I just have to wonder if maybe this is the year that we really do approach and understand and work toward coming up with, excuse me, an approach that will bring the federal government closer into addressing these cybersecurity concerns regarding our critical infrastructure, because it seems like we've had many discussions about it, but it almost it kind of takes something like the water supply attack to really kind of make people kind of stand up and say, well, maybe this is something we need to stop talking about and really start addressing. So do you think that this is going to be the year of those critical infrastructure attacks that really are catalysts, if you will, to actually doing something?
I can't predict if there will be a significant sort of concentration against critical infrastructure, but I think it does highlight, or especially bring it home. My wife even sent me a screenshot of a Facebook news feed. It's getting bad when your spouse, who's not in technology, is sending you alerts on. Unfortunately, that may be what it takes, Charlene, to awaken the public in many respects. So many of the kind of more significant attacks over the last handful of years, we've seen this rise of, really the terminology is so appropriate, but ransomware, the pandemic, and now sort of an endemic that we're living with. And other dynamics that have really hit the private sector, but the consumer really, in a lot of ways, hasn't been hurt, at least directly, that they can tell, unless they get a letter, that saying that their information has been breached, or really most people feel like they were touched in some way by Target. And we know how many years ago that's been at this point. Unfortunately, I do think until people start feeling, impacted in some way, I think that the time is now, at least for the broader public, to be aware and ask more. Of their officials, but also not just their officials, but their technology providers to do more. But there is an increased emphasis, because of the variety of watershed moments that have happened over the last year, really. So 2021 is a big year to make up some ground in that respect.
Yeah, I agree with you in that I think unless you are personally affected by a cyber breach, whether it's your personal information or, in the case of this water supply issue, if it was one of those, oh gosh, it could have happened to me, if they had. If they hadn't caught it right away, there could have been real harm. And I think once it happens to them, I think there's that heightened sense of awareness really does kind of propel folks to kind of have a greater understanding and urgency around addressing these. So do you think then that with the administration coming forward, and their sense of urgency around addressing regulatory compliance and cybersecurity, do you think that issues around critical infrastructure and other elements that, around maybe the military operations and the privacy of that data, do you think that those are going to be of top of mind for the Biden administration moving forward, in addition to, or do you think it will be at the expense of maybe looking at consumer data, the privacy of that? I mean, I'm wondering from a sense of urgency standpoint, if you will, what's going to be more important to the administration?
I think right now, especially given how catastrophic some of the impacts have likely been with solar winds, I don't know that they can help but focus and prioritize that. I do think privacy will be an issue. Where it falls in the priority, I think will it just really kind of remains to be seen, Charlene. But I do think that given the leadership and appointments thus far speak to an administration that's very eager to protect our nation and understand where our weaknesses are. I do think there is a number of, there are still a number of positive things happening at the state level from a privacy perspective. But now, especially from a critical infrastructure standpoint, I also think in terms of just sort of the intelligence apparatus, which is clear that they're ramping up. They will also highlight critical infrastructure. CISA, which you may know is one of the sort of DHS mandated organizations focused on critical infrastructure and resiliency. And the task is significant. I think CISA has built some capabilities around government or more public institutional ramp up of security. But now I think it's time to I think the task will be how can they also integrate further with the private sector, just because we from just a broader technology and where the concentration of our nation's resources are from a technology, a lot of that relies upon private sector now with the advent of cloud and just where your email is hosted as an example. It's not in a data center you or your organization own more often than not now, Charlene. So our government and public entities are also reliant upon big tech in many ways, and at the SolarWinds supply chain issue. So I think the private sector integration, it will be a significant challenge, but yet an opportunity for our nation in the coming years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, when you think about just the amount of data that's housed in the data centers owned by Google and Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure, those actually could be deemed critical infrastructure in and of themselves. And so I think actually that's probably another conversation for another time, but definitely something worth pondering. So Luke, I do want to thank you for your time today. We've got, I'm excited. I got to tell you, I'm excited for the, what the new administration is going to bring for cybersecurity and compliance, and how they're going to address some of the things that I think have really just kind of fallen by the wayside over the last 4 years. So I have high hopes, and I hope this administration doesn't prove me wrong. So.
Indeed, Charlene, I'm optimistic as well, and I think there's a recognition and awareness and an attempt to build visibility, and so I think that we should see positive moves in the coming years.
Wonderful. I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one here. So, well, Luke, thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate you sitting here and talking with me about what we can expect from the Biden administration, and just issues around critical infrastructure, compliancy, regulation, cybersecurity, all that good stuff. So thanks again. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene.
Yeah. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Ringel Brambad, who is the head of the low-code practice in the high-tech digital transformation team at Tata Consultancy Services. Ringel, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlene. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. So let's talk low code. I know it's something that you're very familiar with, and it's certainly something that we've been talking about here in Media Ops in general, but definitely on DevOps.com for quite a while now. And it really seems to have just exploded over the last 10 months or so, especially, with the onset of the pandemic and the rush that so many organizations have made to accelerate their digital transformation efforts. And since you guys are knee deep in low code, really would like to kind of pick your brain a little bit about what you guys are seeing in the market and really the impact that low code is having on development today and maybe possibly in the future. So, but let's take a step back first and talk about where low code has been. It seems like we, as I said before, we've been talking about it for a while. I know you guys have been talking about it for a while, but really doesn't seem like much was happening in the low code space for a very long time. So am I wrong there, or is it, something that really has just kind of been flying under the radar for a couple of years until of late?
Yeah. So, Charlene, here I have a different take over here, because low-code platforms, like when, as you said, that it has been for a long while now. And when they were started, they were mainly focusing on automating the business processes or building the GUI for the applications and all. And they have eventually, and on a day-to-day basis, they have evolved around these years. Like then they have started including the templates for specific industries. They have, that industry flavors have also started getting into these platforms. And recently I have seen they have also included the capabilities, the innovation of technology, which is going on. Like they have also included the capabilities for artificial intelligence, data analytics, AR, VR, all these features and the capabilities have been included. So all these features being included in these platforms basically have evolved the platforms. So it's not like being there for so many years, they haven't evolved. They have continuously evolved, and in future also, I would see as and when the demands of the consumers will increase or will evolve, at that parallel way, even the platforms will also evolve eventually.
So I understand that that the low code platforms have kind of evolved to use your word, as the technology marketplace itself has kind of moved on. But it really seems like, as far as a popularity standpoint, that low code really wasn't that used or that that embraced by especially technology companies, as they really relied on their developer ranks to do the majority of the applications. And now it seems like it's almost been kind of a, they say that necessity is the motherhood of invention. So, can we say the same thing for low code? Has it been the necessity that has really been the catalyst for the increased use of low code over, say, the last 10 to 12 months? Is that what you guys have seen mostly in the marketplace, or is it more just, the time was right for low code and the, that convergence of these new technologies, these new features and functionality of low code merging with the fact that digital transformation is taken off like a rocket, and it was just time?
So it's all together, Shalin, because see, the surge of this low-code platform is all because of the demand of applications going on to cloud, the digitization of the applications, digitization of the business processes. The demand is surpassing the supply of those codes, right? So we need faster return to market now. We need the applications as soon as possible. We need agility in these applications to be developed, right? So this all, as you said, that it is because of this COVID also, the organizations realize the need for going digital, going onto the cloud and all. And for that to happen, low code turned out to be a boon. So yes, in last couple of months, we are hearing a lot about low code. It's just because of, though it was there since so many years, but these right now is the time when, we have got our heroes here. So, yeah.
Okay. What about take into account today's workforce? We're seeing a lot more younger folks coming into technology. A lot of them are digital natives. I mean, we've now reached the point where I think that we have a very healthy population of workers in the tech space who have never lived life without the internet. The smartphones were a thing when they were born. There's so much more, just comfortable with technology. And do you think that has also kind of helped spur low code, because they're not afraid to get in there and kind of muck around, if you will, with applications and build features and add the APIs and do the things that are necessary to kind of help, the larger development efforts. Do you think that that's also been kind of a catalyst for the embracing of low code?
Yes, so that would be the part of the development efforts. Basically, that is what the developers would be. But I would also say even the consumers.
Wrinkle, are you there?
I think we're having some connection issues.
Yeah. I think you're right. Oh, Wrinkle, you're there. Can you hear me? We lost your connection there for a little bit.
Yeah, because it was
okay.
About that.
Yeah. Okay.
Will
All right.
be able to
So,
edit it?
so what we could do is we can start again with your answer for and then we'll just edit that out. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So all right, I'll just count us down 3, 2, 1, and then you could just go right into your answer. Okay. We were talking about the low code and technology natives and yada yada yada. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Starting down 3, 2, 1. Go ahead.
Yeah. So developers who are using and developing the applications onto low-code platform, again, they are millennials, and you are right that they are very comfortable in using such technologies over here. But even the consumers from the business side as well, we have many millennials now joining into that community as well, wherein they need such applications, which is mobile first, cloud first applications, where they can work on the applications from anywhere and anytime. So yeah, basically they are so techno savvy. So they need that mobile first and cloud first applications. And hence we see that low code platforms, which gives all these capabilities under one umbrella, are gaining the popularity over here.
All right. All right, great. So what do you guys see as kind of this, as low code's impact on development in general moving forward? Do you think that this is going to change the way we look at developers or their job roles and responsibilities?
So, Shalin, here I'll see there are, two type of users are impacted with this low code wave which has come. One is the business user, and the other is our technical developers, the code developers, which are here. First, I'll talk about the business users. Business users now are gaining more and more, autonomy on with their applications. They are in more control of how they want their application to work or to function. So now I'll take an example, like if I'm a digital marketing manager, and if I'm running a campaign and I'm running for one specific geography, I want to contextualize my application for that specific geography. I need not go and reach out to a technical team to tweak those small bits of application, like tweaking, adding the fields or changing the UI or images into the application. I need not go to the technical team. Rather, I myself, using those low-code platform, can tweak that application, roll out that application globally. Whereas as far as these technical users are concerned, they can, technical developers are concerned, they can now focus more on complex computing features. They can focus on more complex capabilities within the application and not worry about those operational changes or operational features, their activities they were doing for the applications. So their time is saved. So I would say it is in general very inclusive and collaborative work environment over here, where the development is democratized. So all right. Roles and responsibility primarily are pretty same, but yes, it has been more inclusive now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for collaborative environments myself. So I think that's a great thing. And I know that, low code, obviously there are certain guardrails, I think that organizations need to put in place when they are kind of incorporating low code and these so-called citizen developers and those who are kind of diving into to help. But, there are certain issues that organizations do need to consider, compliance, so many different things that developers really do need to be still in charge of. So I expect that we're going to see developers' roles actually expanding to help these citizen developers as time goes on. So Rinkal, thank you so much for kind of walking me through what you guys are seeing in low code and possibly what the future holds for it. So I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Shannon. Thank you very much. Yeah. Have a good day.
All right, everybody. We have lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned. All right, next up we have Mitch Ashley's regular Analyst Corner segment, and he talks about the retail landscape and how it is changing. It has been changing for a while. Pandemic has made it change even more. So many more transactions are moving online, and it's an interesting perspective on what retailers should expect and should do as more folks just shift all of their transactions to online. It's kind of going off in a CNBC report that it recently put out, and also a conversation that Mitch had with Quentin Wall, who's the CEO of Twilio. And it's also part and parcel with Mitch's upcoming conversation at the Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit. He's going to be talking about online transaction security. So all makes sense to me. So let's give this one a listen.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. If you follow any kind of business news, you know that our retail industry is saying it's under threat is such an adequate way to describe. I mean, it's really cratering in many ways. I mean, I just think about recently in into February, Fry's Electronics, a staple of the industry, of at least places that I like to go. I think they were formed in '85 and been in business 36 years or so. Closing operations, and they're just a long list of people. 2020, you saw Pier 1 Imports, Men's Warehouse, GameStop, Bed Bath & Beyond, Macy's, JCPenney. The list goes on and on. Some interesting stats, and this actually comes from a CNCB article that was late January. In 2020, there are 8,741 closures, retail closures, along with 3,304 retail openings. So it's not all down, but obviously the net is down significantly. Their expectations that they cited were that there would be another 10,000 closings in 2021. So I would expect that if there'll be some rebound there as well. I think already another 2,600 or so have been announced, just all the things that are happening so far. So if you you may be stuck at home and not going out to a lot of places, but organizations like CoreSite are monitoring the retail industry, and it's changed substantially. And of course, the question I have is, as COVID vaccines are administered and the population becomes more immune, and hopefully we get this thing under control, there isn't going to be a retail industry to go back to, at least not the same one. I mean, you do see interesting things happening, like Apple and Target announcing their partnership about Apple being in Target retail locations. So it isn't that there won't be retail, but I suspect that it'll be reshaped. Walmart, for example, is taking a lot of the square footage space in their facilities and turning that into their own local distribution centers for online orders. We're seeing this transformation happen at the same time. So in a way, retail is experiencing its own disrupted, forced digital transformation into online. There are some really good articles. I'll put a link to that CNBC article in this description of this video. Also, I'd suggest, I'll put a link to this as well. Quentin Wall, who's CEO with Twilio, and I talked a little while back, I think it was about October or so of 2020. And of course, if you don't know Twilio, they provide a whole host of features, capabilities for organizations to be their online platform. There are other folks that do that as well, but they're a major player in the industry. And that's really what's shaping the new retail experience. Now, I've said this before on Analyst Corner. As things go digital, the things that tend to happen is we tend to replicate or try to replicate the experience, the non-digital experience in a digital world. So you see this with conferences that look like you're walking into, Moscone Center and walking over to get your badge or look at the agenda and then go into the keynote and go to one of the rooms. Well, that holds together a bit. It's familiar, but it isn't necessarily leveraging all the capabilities of a digital experience. So we're seeing those things be remade. And there's platforms out there like TwoFin and BigMarker, and I mean, the list goes on of companies that are doing kind of virtual event platforms, but starting to think about how it's changing and offering something a little bit different beyond just the standard Zoom and Zoom webinar. So check out that video with Quentin, that article with CNBC. But I think it's a demonstration of the new normal is not the old normal by any stretch of the imagination. And even a new normal isn't a place, more or less it's really a milestone, a signpost of our progress in that direction. So as you're thinking about how you deliver your goods and services, so even if it's B2B as well as B2C, that's obviously changing for all of us. And I think that's going to change how we look at technologies, things like mobile, things like 5G, things like edge computing, distribution centers instead of retail locations. And maybe we'll see some things pop back up that is sort of a new rethinking of retail, much like Starbucks was starting to do before the pandemic, of rethinking their locations to be less of a coffee shop and more of a walk up, take out kind of an experience. So companies are doing that across the board. And I'm sure many of you are examining those same possibilities. But that's going to create a lot of opportunities for those kind of technologies, the rapid need for new applications. You see the rise of low-code, no-code kind of technology, as well as cloud native and more technically sophisticated, if you will, basis for that. But our landscape is changing too in the technology world, in the IT world, and the technologies that we use to do our job. So appreciate you spending time with me today. Do support the retail locations, the restaurants, however you can, and go get vaccinated. We hope we get everybody vaccinated as soon as possible, and we'll be able to see each other in person sometime soon. Take care.
The security landscape is evolving rapidly in the face of disruption. Growing cyber threats, a global pandemic, and other factors have irrevocably changed the way organizations view and adopt security technologies. Cybersecurity 2021, the new normal, will bring together thought leaders, security experts, and IT professionals in the new security landscape and what's ahead in the years to come. On topics ranging from ransomware to DevSecOps, from speakers including Chen-Zi Wang of Rain Capital, Richard Steenan of IT Harvest, and Ira Winkler of Secure Mentum. Visit MediaOps.com/cybersecurity2021 to register.
All right, everybody, that wraps up today's TechStrong TV broadcast. We had so many great conversations today. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did. We will be back on Thursday, March 4th, with a brand new episode of TechStrong TV. Lots going on between now and then, including the kickoff of the Cybersecurity 2021 Virtual Summit. And that, as I said before, is happening March 4th and 5th. And one more time, if you're interested in learning more about it, just go to MediaOpsEvents.com and you'll be able to see the agenda and you'll be able to register there. So hope to see you there, and I hope to see you back on Thursday for another episode of TechStrong TV. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.